He sat staring at the test sheet, trying to figure out yet another problem, when around him his classmates seemed to be turning the whole class upside down. Gamin was an ordinary 15-year-old who didn't really excel in his studies, but he tried his best to do his best. He put a lot of effort into it every day, but the grades were still far from the ideal he wanted. He left the classroom and headed home, holding under his arm a new book he had managed to grab from the library. At home, however, he was in for a surprise in the form of a tutor his mother had apparently hired, seeing how vainly he was trying to study. Her name was Lee Han-kyung, and she was quite a young and pretty girl, so the guy was even a little shy. Mom, meanwhile, decided to tell her new friend a little bit about her son, especially mentioning something weird he's been doing lately. She called it some questionable things, but the girl, embarrassed, told her that all guys were like that and she shouldn't worry. That same day in the evening, she began her tutoring duties, explaining the topic of linear inequalities from algebra. She would say to move all the numbers to the left and ask him if he understood everything, and he would answer in the affirmative. She noticed that he was a fast learner and said that his results would improve if they kept up that pace. Suddenly, her eyes lit up, and she began to tell him with incredible enthusiasm to repeat after her that he could do anything. So a year went by. His grades did improve, and here he was, again sitting on a problem, this time knowing how to solve it. Suddenly, the two classmates, who before seemed ready to attack each other, fell on his desk, beating up one another. With a rumbling sound, the desk flipped over and Gamin was thrown aside. One of those fighting was a student named Hyun-woo, who was the local authority in the class and who had his own gang of bullies like himself. The moment Hyun-woo was beating up another guy, Gamin realized that he had entered the worst professional engineering school. It was the Uisun Vocational School, a rotten place dubbed the School of Criminal Talent. Studying here was a failure, but in places like this, as is always the case, there is one person who does try to learn. To spit on circumstances and create opportunities himself was his motto. However, he came to this school to find that opportunity, because his only hope was to go to university. In a place filled with gangsters who don't learn, this was a great opportunity for him to raise his scores, especially since Uisong School, as it had already been revealed, was a demonic place where battles were fought always and everywhere. Every day he was in this place where everyone is trying to tear each other to pieces. Until one day they brought her in, a new teacher, a replacement for the last teacher who couldn't take it anymore and left. Seeing the new teacher, Gamin opened his eyes in surprise, for it was his former tutor. They were announced that Ms. Lee Han-kyung would be their new class teacher from today. He remembered how she had once asked him what his dream was, and he had simply said enrollment. But she had dreamed of getting a teaching certificate. Said she wanted to be the kind of teacher who could help her students find their way in life. But that was then, and now she stood near the blackboard like a guilty student, and around her classmates paid no attention to her. It became clear that, unfortunately, she had failed her certification test and was now trying to somehow rehabilitate herself into teaching. Suddenly, she slammed her hand sharply on the table, ordering everyone to shut up. Oddly enough, it worked, and she decided to start with the rules when something flew quickly in the air in her direction. Putting her hand up at the last second cushioned the blow, and the object turned out to be a discarded bottle of soap. He was dumped by Hyun-woo, and then he told her to hurry up because they don't have time for her rules. The girl was embarrassed. It was obvious that the guy's words had hurt her. Meanwhile, Hyun-woo was approached by the guy who owned the vial, who seemed to be pretty pissed off by the act. Hyun-woo wasn't satisfied with this attitude, and from the look in his eyes, it was clear that a new conflict was inevitable. A minute later, the owner of the vial was thrown out the window, shattering one of the panes. But that wasn't enough for Hyun-woo, and he climbed onto the windowsill, preparing to jump to the guy and continue the fight. In the blink of an eye, he was already on the ground and swung around to attack first. Just as suddenly, his fist stopped in midair, and everyone heard someone approaching quickly, waving their arms with shouts. It was Tom Kench, the school watchman, whose job it was to break up fights among the students on the school grounds. When they saw him, they all rushed to run, and he threw an angry glance at the new teacher as he approached the classroom. He asked why she just kept quiet and watched, and said that temporary teachers like her have no sense of responsibility. Then he left, telling her to clean up the broken glass, and she was still standing outside the classroom, badly shaken by what had happened. Hardly believing what she saw, she began cleaning up the shards without her usual enthusiasm. Suddenly, immersed in her thoughts, she carelessly picked up a shard and it cut her finger. Her eyes became moist, she seemed ready to cry over everything that had happened to her today, when suddenly she saw the band-aid held out to her. She looked at the man with surprise and was even more surprised to recognize him as Gamin, the guy she had tutored a year ago. They stepped behind the school and she said she probably shouldn't have quit tutoring to try to get certified. Gamin reminded her that it was something she herself wished for, and then asked if she would continue to teach here. He said that was just the beginning. It was so bad that the previous class teacher left after a month. After thinking for a bit, she replied that she couldn't give up that easily, and that she hadn't really even started yet. She said that as long as they work together to solve the children's problems, they are still not hopeless, even if it seems impossible to put them on the right path. But Gamin thought she should avoid them, and was about to say so when a gang of young thugs led by Hyun-woo suddenly appeared from around the corner. His gang is made up of some of the most violent thugs in the school, and now several of them were heading towards their hideout. All of a sudden, Han Kyung popped right out in front of Hyun-woo, and then, to his surprise, told the guys to throw away the cigarettes that everyone in the gang had. Needless to say, Gamin was in shock and excitement began to stiffen him. Han Kyung, meanwhile, came right up to Hyun-woo, saying that it's not even about the rules, but about the harm that cigarettes are doing to their young bodies. She looked straight into his eyes, telling him that they should at least care about that. Then suddenly she dared to take the cigarette from his hand, smiling and saying she only wanted to help. This surprised Gamin as well. He even started to think that she had succeeded. The other guys involuntarily put down their cigarettes as well, and Hyun-woo wondered if she was really going to help them. But when he got a positive answer, he reached out and then slapped her hard. The other guys started laughing, and he asked with a sneer if she hadn't seen a student hitting a teacher, since it was usually the other way around. The gang guys picked up on his speech, saying that she didn't know how to learn from bitter experience and now they would help her with that. The girl couldn't take it anymore. With her last strength holding back tears, she told them not to be like this. But Hyun-woo and his friends weren't deterred in the slightest by this, and soon he tapped her forehead once more. At this moment, Gamin, who was still sitting in the shelter, remembered Han Kyung's words about these children, that they were not hopeless as long as she solved their problems with them. This spurred him into action, and in the meantime, the guys were reaching their hands out to the girl again, this time demanding money. The tutor's happy face suddenly surfaced in his memories, and Gamin walked out to meet Hyun-woo and his gang. Some recognized him, but most didn't understand what he wanted or why he was here until he took off his jacket. He covered the girl with it and said he warned her not to mess with these young thugs. One of them grimaced as he heard this, preparing to lunge at his sudden defender. He swung around to kick his foot, angrily shouting for the man to get away. But to everyone's surprise, Gamin ducked under the blow and then jumped and felled his opponent. It wasn't enough, however, and soon the guy was lunging at him again, this time unhinged. He swung his fist, and the blow threatened to be dangerous, but Gamin stood motionless on his feet. There was something they hadn't realized, for his motto of being a self-made opportunity maker actually belonged to another person. It was Bruce Lee, a famous kung fu fighter and also an actor, who said this and made Gamin rethink his life, and he even picked up a book about him. With one precise blow, he stopped the guy flying at him, punching him in the solar plexus. The other gang members were puzzled by this turn of events, and Gamin meanwhile adopted a fighting stance, preparing to clash with any of them. Even Hyun-woo recognized that one was not amiss, but almost immediately decided to attack on his own. He rushed towards Gamin, not yet realizing what mistake he was making. All this time, Gamin had been training in vain, wanting to achieve the same skill as his idol. These were the dubious things he had been doing. And then something incredible happened. He executed a backflip kick, driving Hyun-woo right into his jaw. The hold came out so spectacular that his glasses even flew off when he landed. The guys were terrified and ran towards Hyunwoo, who even had foam coming out of his mouth. He seemed to be unconscious. Gamin, meanwhile, got to his feet, fixing his clothes and breathing heavily after such elements. Seeing him, the guys quickly scattered. He walked up to Han Kyung and said that the latter talked about her unhappy fate after she stopped being his tutor. Holding out his hand to her, he suggested that she not leave the school and continue teaching him. Rumors about the guy who defeated Hyunwoo with one punch quickly spread throughout the school and beyond. Unfortunately, Ga Ming did not yet know what he was getting himself into, for there were people unwilling to accept the defeat of the school gang. However, his troubles did not end there, because it was time to go to university, and it was quite a tragic story. The girl, smiling embarrassedly, gave him her hand, and they left school together that afternoon. The next day, Ga Ming gave himself a morning workout at the sports field near his home as usual. By this time, he had a gawking policeman waiting for him who loved to watch his workouts, for they were truly admirable. He had a good athletic body, and he was a young guy himself, so he could do the seemingly heavy exercises without much difficulty. He wasn't feeling sorry for himself. Sweat was already dripping off his face, but he kept practicing. Suddenly, he slipped off the wooden toy he had just been doing push-ups on in the horizon and fell on his back with a clatter. The old policeman anxiously asked if he was all right, but the man only thanked him for today and ran off, saying that he should already go home. Entering home, he opened the door carefully so as not to wake his mom. He walked into his room and quickly ducked under the covers as if he had been sleeping like that the whole time. This time he wasn't noticed, and a few hours later his mom came to wake him up and reminded him about school. She told him to eat breakfast on the go or he'd be late, and he sat lazily on the bed trying to open his eyes and put on his glasses. At the same time, on the other side of the street, Han Kyung woke up to the sound of an alarm clock, which didn't please her in any way since she had only slept for 3 hours. She suddenly remembered yesterday's situation with Hyunwoo and how Gamin had stood up for her. Then he told her not to get upset, for these guys could no longer be set on the right path, as she had said. She shook her head, pushing those memories away, telling herself that she shouldn't forget why she wanted to be a teacher. Quickly gathering herself, she walked to school, mentally reassuring herself that today would be better. Gaming was also approaching the school then. He noticed the teacher and stopped in confusion. He remembered yesterday's meeting too, but he didn't care about that right now because he had to do something to improve his grades. In many of the class, he saw the aura of not getting into university, but there were those he hoped to bond with, for they had the aura of getting in. One of them was a guy from the mechanical department, Kim Se-hyun, so Gamin had started communicating with him a few days ago. But Se-hyun wasn't happy about it. He told him to stop talking to him, for he wouldn't even get into the university. Gamin was surprised by this, but he realized that it was likely that to Se-hyun, he was also emitting an aura of not enrolled. Se-hyun, meanwhile, went to the restroom. He was already washing his hands, when suddenly someone put a hand on his shoulder. Thinking that it was Gamin following him even in the restroom, he slapped his hand, glaring angrily at whoever it was. But it wasn't Gaming, it was Chu Jae-wang, a disciple of the hydro-engineering faculty, who was looking at him. Se-hyun looked at him fearfully and ordered him to follow him. At this time in the teacher's lounge, the principal was reprimanding Ms. Han Kyung for being too soft and failing to subdue the students yesterday. He said he chose her because he believes she can be a good classroom teacher, and he will be watching her from now on. Of course, she was also depressed about the situation, but what upset her more was that no one said anything in response to her remarks about students smoking. It was because there was nothing they could do, but she couldn't believe that no one wanted to eradicate the students' bad habits, so she went outside. Walking past the gym, she stopped suddenly, looking anxiously at what was happening. One guy punched the other guy in the face and said that the money Hyunwoo had ordered to be collected had been used up by someone and he himself had disappeared. He added that such brats from the mechanical department should be dealt with more harshly and kicked the guy again, this time with his foot. Seeing the guy who fell down, Han Kyung was startled to recognize Se-hyun, a student from her class. Without thinking any more, she strode towards her abuser, telling him to stop. But suddenly her legs gave a jerk and she fell, not realizing what was happening to her. She was shaking, her mind suddenly replaying the scene of yesterday's confrontation with Hyunwoo and his gang. But here someone took her hand and told her not to sit on the floor or she would get dirty. It was Gamin. He helped her stand up and then assess the situation. Seeing Se-hyun, he told her not to worry because that person emitted the aura of an enrollee, which meant he would help him. He said that things would get a lot more complicated for him if this guy left school, and therefore he should help him. Meanwhile, the offender, who turned out to be Chu Jae-wang, continued to pressure Se-hyun. He noticed that he had tried to fight back before. Gamin wasn't going to wait any longer and walked towards Jae-wang, and Han Kyung anxiously asked what he was going to do. Gamin replied that he was going to help Se-hyun since he needed him to form a study group, and that mentally transported him back to a day from his childhood. That was when he first heard those words from his mother's friend, with whom she was chatting in the kitchen at the time, and Gamin heard everything from his room. A friend told me about her son who put together a study group of friends at school that resulted in their average grades going up as much as 30 points. She said that Gamin should have tried this method of studying too, but his mom said he was very shy for it. She added that she's never seen Gamin bring friends, which means he's probably better off studying alone. He listened to this in his room, and the next morning he tried to enroll in the same study group, but all in vain, for no one wanted to take him. Besides his own, he questioned almost all the children from parallel classes, but everyone found some excuse. The reason was his reputation, for he ranked last in academic performance among his peers, who didn't want to mess with him for it. But the more he was rejected, the more he wanted to join the study group. One evening, his mother stopped by and saw her son's unsuccessful attempts to improve his grades, so she decided to help in another way and hired a tutor. Gamin was very upset about this because he never got the chance to join the other guys. He realized that the geniuses he wanted to be among were out of his reach, so he decided to stay with those who were slow to put down, like himself. Back to reality, he went to protect Se-hyun as Han Kyung suddenly grabbed his arm. She said she wouldn't let him use violence again because it shouldn't be a way out of situations. After thinking for a while, he suddenly smiled at her and told her that she was right, which she hadn't expected in any way. Jae-wang, meanwhile, took another swing at Se-hyun, but he didn't have time to strike because suddenly everything was filled with white foam. It was Gamin. From somewhere he pulled out a fire extinguisher and aimed a jet of foam directly at the gymnasium. Jae-wang was angry. The guys that were with him started to leave, and he let Se-hyun go. Waiting for that moment, Gamin threw the fire extinguisher and grabbed Se-hyun, leading him away from the gymnasium under the smoke screen that had been created. Jae-wang was alone, but he had time to notice them go out the back door. Foam began to come out, and Han Kyung, who had been watching the whole scene, had to admit that there was no fight this time. Meanwhile, Gamin showed his face to Se-hyun, and the latter was surprised, saying that he was definitely following him. He asked if Gamin doesn't know who Jae-wang is, then explained why their school is also known as the Four White Leads, which was due to the Incheon gang leaders who once studied here. But he didn't have time to finish. Gamin interrupted him, saying that he wasn't at all interested in people who didn't care about studying. Se-hyun was shocked. He had never seen someone so indifferent to one of the worst gangs in the city. Gamin, on the other hand, was not embarrassed by anything, and he even dared to ask Se-hyun to join his study group. That turned out to be reckless, and Se-hyun asked in indignation if he didn't know who Jae-wang was too. Without waiting for an answer, he turned around to leave, saying that Gamin had made things worse. Lastly, he said that there was only one thing more important to him than studying, and that was his safety. However, he didn't go far because Jae-wang was already waiting for him from around the corner. He looked at him with his frantic eyes, and it was obvious that he was now making up for the missed opportunity to beat him up. He asked Se-hyun who the guy who helped him was, but Se-hyun didn't give Gamin away, saying he didn't know, and that really displeased Jae-wang. He said he would beat him for both of them in that case. But no sooner had he struck than Gamin jumped out towards them and attacked Jae-wang first, sending the latter into a knockout. Se-hyun was both startled and surprised, looking at both Gamin and the rising Jae-wang in confusion. He couldn't understand why Gamin was helping him when he had rejected him. Gamin looked at him and said that he would try to focus only on his studies, and then asked if he would still join his group. Se-hyun was amazed at his indifference towards Jae-wang and the fact that even in such a situation, he was thinking about studying. Jae-wang, meanwhile, was already on his feet and threw himself at Gamin. But to his surprise, the man shied away, continuing to talk about his study group. Jae-wang took a stand and prepared to attack again, for he couldn't believe that this guy was dodging his punches so deftly while chatting about his studies. He said that there is only one law in this school: you are either strong or rich. Only then you can talk about creating something. Se-hyun seemed to be thinking the same thing, and although Gamin's idea appealed to him, Jae-wang had spoken the truth. There was nothing a mere disciple could change in this place. Jae-wang clenched his fist. He said that here in Yuizong High School it is an indicator of status, and it is difficult for those who don't have it. Se-hyun clutched his eyes as he imagined what was about to happen to Gamin. He suddenly remembered how he was always bullied when he saw him trying to study. But there was nothing to worry about, as Gamin managed to grab Jae-wang's arm, thus stopping the blow. Similarly, he blocked all subsequent attacks and then inadvertently hit himself. Jae-wang found himself on the ground, wondering who this guy was that he couldn't even hit him, even though he was moving fast. Gamin, not paying attention to him, continued to agitate Se-hyun to join his group, where they could do nothing but study together. Gamin asked with surprise if he didn't want to study, and that triggered Se-hyun's memories, because that was what he wished for most here. A smile suddenly appeared on his face, and he replied as he just imagined he wished for this opportunity more than anything else in this school. Hearing his answer, Gamin turned away, which puzzled Se-hyun, but he was actually just happy because the first participant had just joined. After that, they left, and Jae-wang stared in their wake, still not understanding how someone was able to overpower him, one of the leaders of the White Gang. He stood up and wanted to catch up with the boys when suddenly he heard someone's authoritative voice behind him. Intuition did not fail. It was Han-woo Fai, the son of the main leader of the White Gang, who was studying electrical engineering. Han-woo said that he had been watching everything that was going on, and what interested him most was how Jae-wang managed to lose to an unknown person. He told Jae-wang to try to get up if he wasn't badly bruised. However, this was not compassion, and he charged Jae-wang in the face, causing him to quickly fall down, squirming in pain. Han-woo asked if it hurt more than that guy's punches, noting that it wasn't the first time he'd fought someone like him since he'd already defeated Hyun-woo. He said that a child who talks such nonsense about studying is full of hope, and he, Han-woo Fai, would love to see his plans ruined. Meanwhile, the overseer was throwing cigarette butts into the trash can. He was outraged that the school inspectorate had to come today. It also made him angry that this dirty robot was assigned to him, even though he had been at this school for quite some time. That's when it hit him, because he knew who would be perfect for such an occupation. Han Kyung had just finished cleaning the gym, though there were still occasional foam stains in some places. She remembered that it was because she herself had forbidden Gamin from fighting. But this time she could help by cleaning up after that whole scene, so she thought to herself. And suddenly, she remembered his words about the study group and how he had asked her to continue teaching him, if there was anything else she could do to help. But the flow of her thoughts was broken by someone's gruff voice, which was heard at the door. It turned out to be the school custodian, and from the looks of it, he wasn't in the best of moods. He began to question Miss Han Kyung about what she forgot in the gym and why she wasn't doing her math teacher thing. Suddenly, he noticed the foam stains, and in indignation, he shouted that he would find whoever had set this up here. It happened that one of the students of the school was passing by at the time, whom the caretaker immediately stopped, asking if he had seen the culprit. What was Han Kyung's amazement when the guy admitted that he really knew who did it, and she rushed to stop him. Not wanting to frame Gamin, she started to say that she herself was one of those who set it up, when suddenly the guy said that he himself was the culprit. He repeated that he had done it himself, and then apologized, looking guiltily at the caretaker. He seemed to know the guy, and he explained that he noticed the lack of a fire extinguisher in the gym and decided to bring one. He did this knowing about today's inspection at school, but carelessly knocked over the canister when he put it here. Han Kyung looked at all of this with astonishment, for she had never seen this guy before, even though he had studied here. And he took it upon himself to clean up the gym before the inspection came, after which the caretaker took Han Kyung away. Meanwhile, in the school office, Ga Ming was sitting on yet another task that, to his regret, he didn't understand in the slightest. Se-hyun, who was sitting across from him, saw his distress and asked if he had time to change his mind about the study group. He tried to explain Pythagoras' theorem to him, but all in vain. Gamin was terribly weak in math, and it was displayed on Se-hyun's face. Then he asked why he shouldn't become an athlete, since he practiced every day and was good at it, but Gamin said he wasn't interested in that. He said he wanted to go to university but was still bad at his studies, so he decided to put together a study group. He then asked Se-hyun why he was studying at that school with his knowledge, to which Se-hyun replied that it was because of his parents, because they didn't like him to study. Gamin didn't understand it, but he didn't have time to ask because Se-hyun put some old book on the floor. He called it an accessible book and said he briefly jotted down all of his school material here from 9th grade onward. He added that with this, Gamin will be able to relearn math from high school so that he can then better understand the current program. Suddenly, Gamin fell from his chair and blood flowed from his head, and the office immediately felt cold. It was Jae Wang who refused to accept his defeat. He picked up Se-hyun's book. Grinning evilly, he pulled out a lighter and held it up to the book, saying that it was all junk and no one needed to study today. Meanwhile, Han Kyung had replaced the caretaker, and she was now the one cleaning up the cigarette butts, surprised at the number of them. The inspection had already arrived at the school, and now the principal was walking around with the inspector, talking about the school's accomplishments over the past year. Daegu Park, the inspector of the Education Committee, did not seem entirely happy with the situation. On top of that, he saw Han Kyung sorting through the trash and curiously went over to look at it. Seeing him, the girl bowed as he suddenly asked if they had met before. This puzzled her, and she said she was just a simple math teacher, also newly hired. The principal hurriedly led the inspector away, offering to look at the new equipment in the gymnasium, as a sheared Se-hyun suddenly ran up to them. Addressing Han Kyung, he said they had an emergency situation. When asked what happened, he said that one of the school offices was on fire right now, and there were also people in it. Jae Wang had set the book on fire and was now standing in front of Ga Ming, smiling evilly from his face that radiated anger and hatred. He was glad he burned that waste paper and said Ga Ming would be next. Ga Ming didn't plan to hold back this time. He said he wouldn't deny him if that's what he wanted so badly. Meanwhile, outside, everyone was staring at Se-hyun, who had brought such terrible news at the most inopportune moment. The caretaker started to get angry, asking what he was talking about, but the headmaster stopped him, nervously trying to calm everyone present. The inspector, however, still suspected something wrong, so the director took the caretaker aside, instructing him to deal with it immediately. He told him to make sure the news of this didn't spread, and he himself would take the inspector to the gymnasium for now. Han Kyung was also given a task, to go to the storeroom to get a new light bulb, but she didn't understand it and asked what the principal meant. However, he was already in a hurry to get the inspector away. He said that the cause of everything must be a burned-out light bulb in one of the offices. Han Kyung and Se-hyun were already rushing to the scene of the tragedy. It turned out to be their classroom. On the way, Se-hyun told how he and Gamin were studying when suddenly Jae Wang came in and told everyone to get out except them. The commotion started when he set fire to the book that Se-hyun had given Gamin to study. Before he did so, he pushed Gamin and he fell off the chair and blood could be seen on his face. It was clear he couldn't accept defeat, and the flames from the book began to transfer to the bag next to him. Then he, Se-hyun, shouted, intending to approach his friend, but his path was blocked by Jae-wang. He told him to fuck off and that he'd deal with him later too. Se-hyun was frightened, and there was nothing else left for him to do but to leave. He ran out of the classroom, mentally apologizing to Gamin, whom he had left there alone. He didn't want to even think about what Jae-wang would do to him there, so he decided to call for help. Gamin, however, didn't look like he needed help. His eyes lit up with hatred. Jae-wang said that Gamin is just a nutcase if he doesn't know who he is, and that he'll teach him manners for it. But Gamin didn't care about that. He noticed that the fire was spreading rapidly. This behavior made Jae-wang angry, and he kicked Gamin, telling him that he should only look at him. But even after that, Gamin worriedly looked at the flames that had already started to move to the desks, not paying attention to Jae-wang. Then the latter grabbed his head to hit him again, but Gamin threw him away. Seeing Se-hyun's book, he rushed towards it. Unfortunately, she could no longer be saved, and he stood amidst the smoking classroom, refusing to believe that this was the end. The classmates were watching them through the windows, for they were curious as to who this brave guy was who dared to challenge Jae-wang. After realizing that he had shaved off his ability to pull up his studies for middle school, Gamin became very angry. And Jae-wang only added fuel to the fire by saying that all he did was get rid of useless waste paper. Gamin apologized, which puzzled Jae-wang, but as it later turned out, he was saying it to Se-hyun and Ms. Han-kyung because he was going to start a fight right away. The boys stood looking at each other, ready to attack at any moment. Pointing at the burning book, Gamin angrily said that Jae-wang had no idea how much value he had robbed him of. This made Jae-wang laugh, and he threw himself at Gamin, preparing to bring the chair down on him. But as it had been before, Gamin dodged and punched the guy back. He said that even though he was a high school student, he wouldn't help him with his studies, so Gan didn't care about him. He added that he should not interfere with his studies if he did not do it himself, which made Jae-wang very angry. In a fit of anger, he grabbed Se-hyun's flaming bag and threw it at Gamin. But Gamin didn't back down this time either. With a deft movement of his foot, he picked up the bag and then twirled it in the air. Before Jae-wang realized what he was trying to do, Gamin threw the bag at him. The punch was very hard, sending Jae-wang into a knockout and his knocked-out tooth lying on the floor. At this time, Se-hyun and Mrs. Han-kyung were already outside the classroom when they saw Jae-wang fly out of there as if from a kick. It was obvious that he had lost consciousness, plus he had serious injuries and burns. Then Gamin ran up to him and started shaking him, telling him to come to his senses, because he still had to apologize. Seeing his friends calmed him down a bit, however, they had a rather strange look on their faces, and he soon realized why. Turning around, he saw a tall man, and suddenly he remembered that there was to be an inspection at school today. He looked at the man, realizing that if he was the inspector, he was going to have a hard time, for now he was standing over a beaten boy near a burning office. As expected, it was Inspector Park. He asked Gamin what his name was. The headmaster slammed his fist angrily on the teacher's lounge table. He scolded Ms. Han-kyung again for failing to supervise the order in the classroom. He had already used Gamin's name this time, saying that he was the culprit for everything, but Han-kyung denied it. He stood up, saying he had to talk to this guy immediately about his expulsion. The girl looked shocked, for she knew for sure that Gamin was innocent. She said that the principal himself knows very well that future criminals attend their school, but Gamin is not one of them. But the principal made no reply to this and opened the door, where Inspector Park stood before him. The principal hurriedly suggested that he talk to him about the situation outside. The inspector asked if he would talk to Gamin about it, adding that he would personally go himself. Then he glanced at Han-kyung, saying that the class teacher should go as well. By then, rumors of a fight in the office, which was also on fire, had spread quickly. Gamin was sitting in one of the classrooms, waiting for the teachers to arrive. He was very sad. He thought about what would happen to him now. Because he couldn't be expelled, it would be a big blow to his mom. Suddenly the doors opened slightly, and Sehyun's concerned face appeared from them. He went in, closing the door behind him, and Gamin asked what he was doing here, for he might be in trouble. Sehyun tried to respond with a joke, saying that the head of the study group was wrongly accused. He then asked why the man had gone so far, since it was just an old math book. Gamin didn't seem to understand the question. He said that he couldn't. Otherwise, after all, Se-hyung had put so much effort into this. He said he could never write like that himself, and Se-hyun did it really well. He added that it was so neat that he even felt that desire for Se-hyun to get smarter. He ended up turning all his efforts into ashes. That was the reason for his anger. Suddenly he saw the glasses held out to him and looked at Se-hyun in confusion. He said he found them when he was cleaning up the classroom after the fire, and now he came to return them. He then embarrassed himself by saying that he had yet to thank Ga-ming for his help. He offered to help each other from now on, and Ga-ming couldn't hide his smile. But suddenly the door opened, and a whole delegation led by the inspector entered the room. Noticing Se-hyun, the director told him to get out of here if he didn't want to be implicated as an accomplice. The inspector, Han Kyung, and the principal listened to Ga-min's story about the flaming book together. The director realized that the real reason lay elsewhere, but he couldn't let the inspector find out. He accused Ga-min of using violence on school grounds. He said that guys like that should be punished so they don't get ugly in the future, and Han Kyung really didn't like that. He assured the inspector that the school would set up a special committee on the matter and suspend the boy so that he would not disturb others. This was the last straw for Han Kyung. She suddenly said that the true culprit is high school student Jae Wang, and Ga-min is the victim here. She stated that he also constantly interferes with others' studies, and is also affiliated with the White Gang. Hearing about the criminal gang, the director looked at Han Kyung in horror. He told her not to spread such nonsensical rumors about their school. He advised the inspector not to jump to conclusions, saying that the school would definitely fix the problem. He said that the guy would be suspended, and it was obvious how Ga-min pouted after saying those words. He sat and wondered if it would end like this for him when he had only made a friend within the walls of this rotten place. He remembered Se-hyun's words of calling him a friend and didn't really hear Han Kyung trying to defend him. Fearing that she would say something about the school again, the principal hurriedly took the inspector to the exit as he suddenly stopped. Han Kyung took advantage of this by saying a single sentence about how it was actually the school that was most to blame here. She said teachers shouldn't worry about testing, but give themselves wholeheartedly to the students. It was good that the director was standing against the light, so that his reddened eyes could not be seen because of his glasses. Han Kyung turned to the inspector as well, saying that she will fall victim to the administrative system if they expel Ga-min. She added that she wouldn't let that happen, and her eyes radiated incredible confidence in that moment. Suddenly, Inspector Park smiled, saying that now he finally remembered at last. He said he remembered where he had seen Ms. Han Kyung before, because she was the best candidate who received her teaching certificate last year. Meanwhile, two guys were standing outside the nurse's station, about to quickly go in and pick up the medicine, all because Jae Wang was lying there. They continued to chatter about his current reputation as suddenly a large shadow loomed over them, and then they bumped heads. The person who did it said it was outrageous when such cowards dare to bark something about someone else's reputation. It turned out to be the son of one of the White Gang leaders, a high school student named Sang-hin Ban. Suddenly, he laughed out loud, and the boys decided to bolt while the opportunity presented itself. Without ceremony, he tapped the door with his foot, and it opened with ease, because the guy was pumped up and, apparently, went to the gym. He walked into the nurse's station and peered into Jae Wang's room, still laughing loudly, and then asked if he liked being beaten. But what he saw puzzled him, and then he screamed in anger. Meanwhile, the principal refused to believe Han Kyung's words, asking if he had just heard it. Seeing that she was serious, he tried to lighten things up by saying that there might be other disciples like Ga-ming. But then he touched Ga-min, saying that he was the only one who wasn't serious right now. He looked at the inspector for support, but he only glanced at his watch, letting him know he had no intention of taking his side. Without giving up, he continued to accuse Gamin as Han Kyung suddenly grabbed his arm. She told him to stop because Gamin isn't that kind of kid, and that shocked the principal. He said she's only been a classroom teacher for 2 days and already she's talking like she's always worked here. He had said that violence was not the way out of situations, and it made her remember how she had said the same thing to Gamin. But raising her head, she said that ever since the school abandoned this very principal, the student decided to fight for survival. The principal had not expected this response, looking at this new teacher in horror. She asked if his correct words should not primarily apply to the school itself. The principal's face darkened, and he told her not to lecture him in front of the inspector. He lashed out at her, saying that she was just a temporary teacher and had no right to say such things about the school. Suddenly, the inspector, who had been watching the whole time, started laughing. He put his hand on the principal's shoulder, saying that he was defeated. He told Han Kyung that she hadn't changed a bit and that she was as brave as ever. He once again called her the top candidate for teacher certification, and she looked at him, still not understanding. But the principal understood everything well. Opening his mouth in surprise, he had no idea that Han Kyung was this good. Gamin also didn't seem to understand the situation, for he thought that the tutor simply couldn't pass the test, let alone the best candidate. Both of them stared at Han Kyung, asking if it was true. The principal started talking about the misunderstanding, because it couldn't be that the best candidate got into the local private school. He approached Han Kyung, saying she had gone through a certification program for high school math teachers in Seoul last year. When she nodded, he said she hadn't finished registering the certificate, so unfortunately it had to be canceled. Han Kyung was puzzled. It seemed like she wasn't the person in question. In Gamin's mind, memories of her telling him that this was her dream, there was no way she gave up after that. Inspector Park was surprised too, saying he didn't think he'd see her in such a place. However, he knew something else. So after a while, he asked in wonder if this was the school she wanted to change. Then he asked what she was going to do about it, but it was obvious that the principal didn't like that kind of talk. He said Ms. Han Kyung is not in a position to propose such ideas, even if she is the best candidate of the teacher certification program. When he said that, Han Kyung thought of Gamin again. She remembered everything that had happened to her during that time, as well as how Gamin had helped her and Se-hyun. After briefly thinking about it, she said she wanted to start by creating a study group for the students. She said that she wanted to help Gamin in this way, since it was actually his idea. The principal couldn't believe his ears. He asked the inspector if he was seriously considering her proposal. However, the man really thought about it, and then said that he was actually not against such an idea. The director was completely confused. In his bewilderment, he began to talk about the whole absurdity of such a plan. But the inspector interrupted him, saying they should be concerned about other problems, such as an inoperable fire alarm system. He said he would turn a blind eye to it, but Ms. Han Kyung should be the study group leader. With that, he left the office and walked to his car. Then he took another look at the school, while thinking about Han Kyung's words. When he got into the car, someone in the passenger seat asked why he had been gone so long. The guy who said this turned to the inspector, calling the inspector his father. It was the same guy who had helped Han Kyung out at the gym this morning. His name was Shogun Park. Park Sr. replied that he had just seen the photo and asked his son if he had overdone it too much, looking as he wiped his bloody hands. To this, Shogun only smiled, asking if the school shouldn't be responsible for its students. He remembered how he had treated Jae-wang, adding that if this continued, this place would soon become a sea of blood. Inspector Park agreed with his son, saying that this school could not be changed, and at that moment he was reminded of Han Kyung's words. The next day, an invitation to the study group appeared on the bulletin board. Students reacted differently to the announcement, but there were more who were negative. As he walked by, Se-hyun heard that this idea was brought up by the one who had put up a fight yesterday and beat up Jae-wang himself. There were bad rumors about Gamin. People did not understand why such a thug would study. Not wanting to hear it anymore, Se-hyun turned around and walked away, while a new student looked at the bulletin board. Shogun Park read the invitation curiously, turning his attention to the leader of the group. He saw Han Kyung's name and her contacts there, and it interested him. In the evening of the same day, Han-wol also read the announcement. He didn't trust Gamin, believing that by doing so, he was acting like a doormat. There wasn't a soul nearby, so no one noticed when he suddenly tore up the ad. And then Saturday came, and here Han Kyung stood under a familiar house, thanking her memory that she still hadn't forgotten the place. This was Ga-ming's house. She remembered coming here when she was still studying for her certification exams. Suddenly, an old policeman swept by her, reminding her of the white rabbit from Alice. It turned out that he didn't have to walk far, as he stopped already a few meters away, looking at the training ground. Han Kyung followed his gaze and suddenly saw a guy who was doing push-ups, with his head down. She opened her mouth in surprise, for the guy turned out to be none other than Ga-ming, who kept counting push-ups. She called out to him, saying he was incredibly strong, and he saw her and lost his balance, and immediately fell off. She apologized for the delay, for that must be the reason he had decided to practice. Gamin was confused, saying he didn't remember them making an appointment. He asked where she wanted to take him, but she just said to follow her, and then he would figure it out for himself. It turned out she'd led him to a bookstore, but that didn't make it any clearer to him. Han Kyung started to choose different books. She said that reading is necessary in the learning process. After collecting a sizable stack, she told him not to worry because she was going to pay for everything. Seeing these books, Ga-ming queried if she would really pay for everything, and she only laughed, saying that it was enough for light reading. But Ga-ming wasn't sure about that and was already beginning to question his chances of reading all of this. He said he was surprised she was able to pass the teacher certification program and be the top candidate. He apologized for once wanting to drop out and said it was what got him through high school. Han Kyung replied that she didn't think she was anything special because even during the exam she was just answering questions. She said there were a lot of things she wasn't good at. One of them was her not-so-strong heart. She added that passing the certification exam and being a good teacher are two different things. Suddenly she asked Ga-min hopefully if he would help her, promising to work hard to make him a good student. She was still talking when suddenly someone threw a book at her, saying she didn't want to study. Ga-ming reacted quickly. In the blink of an eye he was with her. He managed to smack the book away. Their eyes met for a second and he looked away in embarrassment while some mother apologized for her boy's act. Han Kyung smiled sweetly at him, saying that she was counting on his help in setting up the study group. She would return home in the evening, remembering her tutoring practice with warmth. She never recanted, and though it would be very difficult, she still wanted to change this school. Suddenly she noticed something strange. It felt like the apartment had been broken into. He cautiously opened the door and peeked inside, but at a glance, she thought everything was normal. Ga-ming was also returning home. He was carrying a whole stack of books that he now had to read. Somehow the bags didn't seem as heavy as they had been before, and he suddenly realized that Han Kyung must have mistakenly taken some of his books. But when Han Kyung turned on the light, she was horrified to find that she had been broken into, and now the Hyun-woo gang was in her house. He looked at her and mockingly asked if they could join the study group too. Without waiting for an answer, he slapped her across the face to the friendly laughter of the other guys. Gamin decided that he'd better go to her now and pick up the books, so he wouldn't have to wait another day since it was Saturday. Meanwhile, in one of the hotels in the city, Sanguine Bang suggested going to take revenge. In addition to him, there was a beautiful high school girl there, as well as Han Wol-fi, who was sitting with her. They chatted together about their affairs without paying attention to Sanguine Bang's suggestions, and it made that one angry. He called out to Han-wol once more, saying that they couldn't just leave it at that. After all, Jae-wang had gotten hurt. He said they should do something about it, for the man is one of them, the son of one of the white gang leaders. Seeing that Han-wol still wasn't paying attention, he boiled up, saying that he wouldn't leave it like that. Then Han-wol finally told him not to yell, because if you think about it, it was fun. Sanguine Bang didn't understand and wanted to continue, but Han-wol gave him a glance that told him to stop. He said he had nothing in common with someone like Jae Wong except for his father's robot. This was the end of the conversation, and Sanguine Ban, who still didn't understand anything, had to be silenced. Hanwoo said it was fun to watch a once decent boy turn into a violent bully. Now that he understood what it meant to be strong, he took joy in oppressing others. Hanwoo said that those who have felt strength and power always change. That's why he decided to test it again on a guy who was perfect for it. First, it was necessary to change his surroundings. Han Kyung looked fearfully at the high school students led by Hyun Woo, who had just hit her again. Toth asked if she missed his arms, saying that he himself did miss her. Terrified, Han Kyung started running, pulling out her cell phone and dialing 112 as she went. But Hyun Woo quickly blocked her path and threw her back into the room. He told one of his guys to take the phone away from her, and he threw it on the floor, canceling the call. Hyun grabbed her hands and asked why people were still afraid if there were police in the world. Without waiting for an answer, he continued by saying that it was because the police come when the crime is already complete. With a fearful expression on his face, he said that the victim is always left with psychological trauma. Then he left Han Kyung and told the guys to get to work on the robot. Together, they all started approaching the girl, and Hyun Woo said that they would do anything to make sure she didn't want to be a teacher anymore. Taking her by the hair, he asked her where to start, and Han Kyung screamed in terror, calling for help. Suddenly the door opened, and the shadow of a short guy with a hood over his head appeared on the threshold. Hyun Woo and the others looked at him puzzled because they hadn't been warned that there would be someone else. Hyun Woo thought it was the same guy from his class who had already beaten him up once while defending the teacher. But it wasn't Gamin. Shogun Park walked into the apartment, looking around curiously. Han Kyung remembered how the man had helped her with cleaning the gym yesterday, but she didn't understand how he ended up here. Park Jr., meanwhile, said something about Hanwoo's plot, saying that after all, the man is just a thug. Hyun Woo looked at him in bewilderment, trying to figure out how he got here and if it was a coincidence. He ordered one of his own to see to it that the new guest did not disturb them. But before he could even swing, Shogun attacked him, knocking him down with one powerful blow. Seeing this, the other guys rushed at him together as they suddenly saw a metal object in his hand. Hyun Woo thought that Hanwoo had miscalculated, for it was clear that his visit was no accident. This guy had come here because he knew, and now he had brass knuckles in his hand, preparing for defense. With a crazed look, Hyun Woo asked if he was right when he said that he knew about their plan. He said he already knew such fighters for justice and pounced on him, hitting him with a left. Shogun crouched in pain. This guy obviously knew where to hit. Hyun Woo said triumphantly that he thought so, assuming that the left punch would be more painful. Then he struck again, and then again until Shogun blocked. One of his gang asked Hyun Woo if he knew the guy, to which Hyun Woo replied that he remembered him from middle school. He said there was one incident then that only those who studied there knew about. He then said with a sneer that he never imagined that he would move on to Wisun High School. Shogun felt a strange emotion. He didn't think Hyun Woo knew what had happened back then. Grabbing his brass knuckles, he tried to calm down, then threw them and broke the window. Shards sprinkled on the heads of Hyun Woo and his guys, and some of them even hurt themselves. Hyun Woo said that he was using dirty tricks, but Shogun was no longer in the room, and neither was Han Kyung. Together, they were already running down the street, but suddenly had to stop. Hanwoo envisioned a similar scenario, so he sent an extra group waiting outside. Shogun covered Han Kyung with himself, looking apprehensively at those blocking their way. Meanwhile, Han Kyung's phone rang. It was Gamin dialing, but no one picked up. He was told that the number dialed was not answering, and he wondered why she wasn't picking up. He even thought that the teacher was ignoring him, for it was already late enough for any kind of communication. After a little thought, he still decided that he would pick up his books on Monday, though the thought did not make him happy. Suddenly, he heard her name, as well as Hyun Woo's voice, saying that they had to find her. He said they must finish with her now, or Hanwoo Fi would be very angry. Gaming quickly realized what the matter was. Fixing his glasses, he stealthily ran after the guys. Meanwhile, Shogun was already preparing for another fight. One of those blocking their way said that now they would have to make sure that the girl didn't want to be a teacher anymore. But he said it would be difficult for him to do so because beautiful teachers like her are quite rare. Shogun covered the girl with himself, telling the guy to stop talking. Then the man suddenly pointed his finger at him, saying in surprise that he was the one from middle school. The Shogun grudgingly grimaced, thinking about why everyone might suddenly know about that incident. And the guy threw himself at him, saying that thoughts of that fool from middle school would haunt him constantly. He came from America in 8th grade and immediately took his 2nd place, bringing him to his knees because he overcame. Such an embarrassment he couldn't forget, so he immediately recognized Shogun Park's face. Then he told him to knock it off with his bad behavior. The guy jumped at him, swinging his leg in for a kick, saying that now they were going to figure out whose place was where. But Shogun suddenly repelled his blow with something metal that was suddenly in his hands. The assailant fell to the ground, grabbing his leg and screaming in pain. The Shogun straightened to his full height, his face grew sinister, and he said he would show him the place. He said it's no use trying to rank as a top fighter when you're such a scumbag. Then he displayed his weapon, which turned out to be a crowbar from Han Kyung's apartment left by Hyun-woo. The girl remembered seeing it when they were running away, but it hadn't occurred to her to grab it. Shogun meanwhile realized that the guy in front of him knew nothing about that incident, but was only holding a personal grudge. In that case, he was becoming useless, so the Shogun decided to teach him a lesson. Street trash deserves a good thrashing, even though the other guys had guns on them too. Han Kyung watched in horror as the guys were about to fight right in the middle of the night. She didn't believe they were just minor children. Her train of thought was interrupted by Hyun-woo. She didn't even notice him sneaking up on her. He wondered where her new protector was, and then, spotting Shogun, smiled crookedly. Seeing that he was busy fighting, he realized that no one could stop him now. And Shogun realized the same, but there was really nothing he could do. Hyun-woo swung around to hit the girl again, saying that now it would be over for her. Watching his actions, she realized how deluded she had been, for she had thought that, in fact, they were good guys. Clamming up, she asked herself when these kids had turned off the right path. But there was no punch. Someone stopped Hyun-woo by grabbing his hood. Gamin tossed it aside, still holding the bags of books he had bought. Han Kyung looked at him in surprise, for she hadn't expected to meet him again today. He explained that she had taken some of his books by mistake, and he had called her to tell her about it, but she hadn't answered. Then he asked what happened to her, but she said it was a long story. She pointed at Shogun, who was still fighting, saying he needed help. At this moment, Gamin was simultaneously attacked by Hyun-woo and his accomplice, but he successfully repelled the attack. With one jump, he knocked out both of them and went after Han Kyung. This technique of his saw the Shogun. He was surprised, for he had not expected help. And he could use one since he just got a chain to the stomach. But there were no further blows. Gamin threw back the offender. The only one left was the guy with the chain, who started swinging it around, threatening to finish them both off at once. He attacked, but Gamin set up a stick he took from one of the guys. He then quickly wrapped the chain around the stick, knocking it out of the bandit's hand. The Shogun watched his actions in surprise, thinking that this was his way to disarm his opponent. However, Gamin suddenly snapped the stick in half, and it had now turned into a real nunchaku. At that moment, one of the bandits snuck up on the bottles thrown near them. He grabbed one and swung it over Gamin's head, who, however, didn't even turn around. Suddenly, the bottle in his hands shattered and the guy backed away from him in fear. The new weapon worked perfectly, and Gamin now held it, preparing to use it at any moment. He told Shogun that he had heard from Miss Han Kyung that he had come from America. That meant he spoke English pretty well, and meanwhile, the guys were preparing for another attack. Gamin stood up and covered Shogun with himself, clutching the nunchaku in his hand, lastly asking if he was interested in the study group. Shogun stood up as well, saying that now was not the time to talk about it. But Gamin just asked him to hold his packets and then turned back to the guys. Those were in anticipation of a fight, telling him to hurry up. That day, Gamin's mom saw that her son had made a whole schedule for the school year. She looked at the points interestedly, noticing that he was really starting to try. But upon reading the last paragraph, she was surprised, her face expressing incomprehension. It said practice nunchaku. The first blow was given to the boldest one, who got right under Gamin's arm. The others backed away a bit, seeing the power of this invention they now had to deal with. They decided to go for quantity and pounced on Gamin together. But the one fought them off and then attacked one by one. Shogun Park looked at this with astonishment, still holding the bags of books that Gamin had given him. Gamin, meanwhile, was already applying kung fu, swinging his legs and rendering his opponents unconscious. One he even took for a chokehold, throwing the nunchucks around his neck and then dropping him to the ground. The shogun of course knew that Gamin was a strong guy capable of defeating Jehuang, but to do so much. He was clearly no match for them, and soon all the bandits lay stunned on the ground. Gamin, on the other hand, was only worried that he would now have to throw away these nunchakus, since they weren't even real. Han Kyung noticed that the fight was over and rushed over to him. She asked if he had hurt himself, since that should be unavoidable with so many people. But he said he was perfectly fine, a little embarrassed by her worries. Suddenly, the sound of a broken bottle near where Hyunwoo was lying caught their attention. It turned out he had been hit on the head with a bottle and was now bleeding. It was Shogun who did it, putting his foot on his chest, saying he wasn't done with him yet. He said the man wouldn't leave here until he told everything he knew about this incident. To make the latter understand better, he leaned toward him and clarified by talking about an unsolved murder in Donggu, Incheon. He said the latter had a duty to know since he was associated with the White Lead gang. He brought the crowbar to his throat, once again asking who the true culprit was. But Hyunwoo didn't respond, so Shogun thought of another way. He said that now Hyunwoo shouldn't mind opening his mouth with that very crowbar. That would be pretty fair considering he broke into Han Kyung's house before. He swung around and brought the crowbar down on the guy, shaking with fear. He said that such a simple punishment he should take with honor. But suddenly the crowbar was stopped by someone's hand, and the shogun looked unhappily at whoever had done it. Gamin held loss, stopping him right at Hyunwoo's throat, and looked at Shogun as well. Park Jr. told him to let him go because he was getting in the way of him finishing his case, but Gamin didn't. He said that he was going too far, but Shogun replied that his end justified the means. He said he'd rather finish what he started with that rotten thug. He added that Gamin shouldn't stand in his way. It would be better if he left now. He said that Hyunwoo deserved it because the incident he was talking about was his mother's murder case. Gamin suddenly imagined how the same thing would have happened to his mom and understood Shogun's motives well. Shogun told him not to stop him, because he would find out the truth anyway. But Gamin suddenly grabbed Hyunwoo himself and asked in anger if it was him. He asked if he was one of the people who did it. He had already even swung to strike, but now Shogun stopped him. Han Kyung also hurriedly took him away from the frightened Hyunwoo. Shogun asked if he really wasn't catching on, or just pretending to be dumb. He asked if Gamin really thinks Hyunwoo is the true killer. Shogun said that even a fool could see that he wasn't the culprit, since he didn't have the guts for the actual murder. In reality, he's just a pawn of Hanwol who wants to assert himself at the expense of others. Hyunwoo listened to all of this with fear, wondering what he was going to do next. But Shogun just said that it wasn't surprising if he really didn't know anything about the real culprit. Gamin hesitated, remembering that he had heard this name Hanwol somewhere before. The shogun observed that unless such people are uprooted, they will continue to do whatever they want. He said this to Ms. Han Kyung, saying that she should do something about it. Of course, she realized it too, and said that Hyunwoo should be punished. But she was interrupted by Gamin. He finally remembered that he heard Hyunwoo call Hanwoo's name when he ran after Han Kyung. The shogun was surprised that he only noticed it, gave him the bag of books, and told him they were unlikely to get along. He tells Han Kyung that she can do whatever she wants to Hyunwoo, but he didn't advise what she'd understated about punishment, because it didn't make sense. He said he only says this because she reminds him of his mom, who was just as naive. After that, he withdrew, and Ga Ming thought how cruel he could be after all. Han Kyung looked Hyunwoo in the eyes, and he felt uncomfortable under her gaze. She looked at this kid, and thought that even he should realize that breaking into other people's homes was a crime. She realized he was doing it because it was all he had. Much worse was the peer pressure, because it is under him that he does these things. There was definitely going to be one person at the head of all of this, and she already knew what she was going to do next. She sent Gamin home, saying that she would take care of everything herself now. On Monday, they were in for some bad news from her. It concerned the study group. She said the director has ordered the group to be shut down if they don't get 3 more participants by the end of the week. Se-hyun said it was impossible with their reputation, and Gamin suggested acting unofficially. Han-kyung was not satisfied with such answers. She tried to boost their morale. She said it wasn't all hopeless. In fact, she'd already been contacted about joining. The boys asked again what the man's name was, but the answer came as a surprise. The thing is, this person turned out to be a girl, as the school was coeducational. Her name was Ji-woo Lee, 17 years old, majoring in chemical engineering. Han-kyung, meanwhile, was expecting to meet someone. She really wanted to talk to this person. She didn't wait long, and soon Han-woo appeared in the doorway, peering at her curiously. It was their first meeting. He asked why she had summoned him, and she prepared herself for the conversation. Though the school was coeducational, the male and female classes were highly segregated. So much so that it was rare to meet guys here, which was why everyone looked at them like that. Gamin and Se-hyun stood outside one of the girls' classes, thinking of the best way to ask about the girl they were looking for. Gi-ming got very embarrassed when he had to speak, but luckily they heard the name they wanted. They were lucky because someone called Ji-woo Lee right out of that class. But when they looked inside, Se-hyun immediately bounced away, looking at the girl he saw. He told Gamin that there was probably some mistake after all. There was no way that this girl wanted to study with them. He wished he had recognized her at once, for come to think of it, it was clear as day. Ji-woo Lee was Hyunwoo's twin sister, plus she had the same hair color. And he also said she had a pretty bad reputation, which would only hurt their study group. The girl was sitting at her desk when a classmate approached her. Suddenly she slapped her in the face, and it shocked the boys, for they thought she was just like her brother. Gamin and Se-hyun stood in surprise as they watched what was happening. Another classmate looked at Ji-woo worriedly, asking if she was okay. The girl who hit was named Mi-hee Hwang. She said she told Ji-woo to give her a performance rating. She told her not to think she could act so arrogant because of her boyfriend. The other girls roared upon hearing this, saying that Kyujin didn't even consider her his girlfriend. Mi-hee Hwang suddenly saw the performance rating she needed in the hands of one of her classmates and snatched it up. She glanced there, puzzled, asking for some reason about studying for exams. The one who had the rating snatched from was named Haiwon Choi. She was shy and rather soft-spoken. Noticing her gaze, Mi-hee Hwang swung around to hit her too, so she wouldn't look at her like that. But Ji-woo stopped her by grabbing her arm, and her grip was pretty tight. She looked at her with a detached look, telling her that the only one she could pester was her. Because Haiwon sat up all night and worked her ass off studying. So Mi-hee Hwang should stop picking on the good kids. Better to let her hit her, Ji-woo. The other girls started calling her names, saying that she was just Kyujin's puppet. Mi-hee Hwang told her to have her uniform on her desk for the next class. And if she won't do it, then let her pay back the money her brother owes her. Suddenly, she looked at the performance rating that was on the floor and was surprised. Gamin leaned over him, studying the girl's balls and holding a piece of gum thrown by someone on the tip of his finger. Mi-hee Hwang asked him what he was here for and who he even was, but he didn't answer her. Instead, he asked Ji-woo Lee if she really did it herself, referring to the ranking ball. The girl looked at him absent-mindedly, unable to answer anything. Se-hyun, who was watching all this through the window, thought that Gamin was really fearless. Suddenly, another guy, Han-woo's right-hand man, Kyujin Kim, entered the classroom. Noticing Gamin, he asked if he was the guy who beat up Jae-wang and what he was doing next to his girlfriend. He didn't wait for his answer, saying he would fight him in that case. But Gamin didn't want any trouble. He remembered how he was 8 acquitted for fighting. So he hurriedly left the classroom, leaving a puzzled Kyujin with his girlfriend. He didn't go far, however, because he heard the man, oddly for a guy, talking to his girlfriend. He told her to hold out her hands, for he must punish her for her bad behavior. It was obvious that Ji-woo wanted to resist, but didn't for some reason. She held out her hands, and he asked if she should hit 3 times, or if it was already 4. He swung around and said he was being magnanimous by choosing such a light punishment. But he didn't have time to punch because he felt someone throw gum at him. It was Ga-ming who asked what kind of behavior he was having with his girlfriend. This amused the guy. He said he thought Ga-min had run away like a coward. He added not to let the man think that since he had defeated Jae-wang, he could now fear no one. He then grabbed him by the collar, saying he was about to show him his power. But he failed to do so. Someone called out to him impatiently. It was school custodian Tom Kench, who asked Kyujin if he hadn't heard about the council gathering. Kyujin grudgingly fiddled and let go of Ga-ming. Now he had to go. He was a member of the student council, and Ga-min said they would meet again. Ga-ming breathed a sigh of relief, for this time he had been blown away and avoided a fight. Ji-woo meanwhile said that she was just in a nasty mood right now and got up to leave. Hyvon rushed after her, and Ga-min didn't know what to do, left standing still. After a while, they were already sitting outside, Se-hyun scolding him for daring to pick a fight with a student council member. Ga-min replied that he didn't know who he was, and Se-hyun told him not to lie, because he's always standing at the school gate. Ga-ming then said that he couldn't just stand there and listen to the man who was going to beat his girlfriend. All of a sudden, Hyven walked up to them. It was obvious she was very concerned about something. She admitted to the guys that, in fact, she did it. She sent an application to join the study group on behalf of Ji-woo. Then she desperately asked to save her friend, and tears glistened in her eyes. The guys suggested she sit down and tell it all from the beginning, which she did. It started with the fact that she was constantly bullied in middle school, and she studied terribly. However, she forced herself to muster up the courage to enroll in the Yuisong Vocational School. Less than a week later, she was again the object of ridicule from her new classmates. They kept taking money from her until one day, Ji-woo Lee showed up. She understood her situation and decided to help, for she saw that Hyewon was a good girl. From then on, whenever someone hurt her, she would step in and stick up for her. It helped her every time. Because she was strong, she used to do judo. That's how a coward like her, Hyewon, got some real support. They bonded and even started going to the library together on weekends. But one day, her twin brother Hyunwoo borrowed a large sum of money from Kyujin. When he did, Kyujin intentionally recorded video of him fighting, most likely to use later as blackmail. But Kyujin also forced Ji-woo to do as he wishes by blackmailing him with this video. Ji-woo was usually annoyed when it came to her brother, but still, he was the only family she had left. That's when it all started. The bullying, the insults directed at GW. Hyewon said she's always gotten help from her, and now she wants to help her too. She hasn't told GW yet that she's moving because of Daddy's job. But she knows what it's like to be bullied, no matter how strong she is. She stood in front of the guys and in tears, once again asked them to save Jin-woo. Also, from that point on, she asked them to replace her for Ji-woo and study with her. Gamin and Se-hyun were surprised at her loyalty to her friend, looking at this shy but confident girl. Of course, Gamin agreed, and Se-hyun was still concerned about having to deal with Kyujin. After thinking for a bit, he still agreed, saying that they had Gamin on their side, and that was already a victory. Ga-ming smiled at his words and said that the first thing to do now was to get rid of the recording. Han-woo sat and looked at Han-kyung puzzled. She asked what kind of child Hyunwoo was. He replied that he was new here, so he didn't know much, but she said she was aware of their connection. He didn't understand her game, after all. She was asking about Hyunwoo when she herself almost became a victim yesterday. He replied that she's wrong to say that they're close and that he only knows that Hyunwoo has a big debt. He said that he borrowed money from his friend and also mentioned that Hyunwoo has a twin sister. Ji-woo Lee's name sounded so unexpected to Han-kyung that she was greatly surprised without hiding it. Some high school kid was spinning a flash drive of Hyunwoo's fight footage, contemplating the fact that he could blackmail Ji-woo now too. The office doors opened slightly, and someone's face showed from them. Gamin suddenly saw the flash drive that Haiwan was talking about. It was now being held by a guy unknown to him. It all started when Gamin came up with the idea of sneaking into the student council room. Se-hyun was against it, of course, but Gamin was guided by the fact that the flash drive might be there. Se-hyun then said that the student council is a necessary evil that punishes petty bullies. In this way, they control the school grounds and are considered in charge, especially the current student council, because it is said to be run by one person. They are all underlings of Han Wolfi, who controls them all. Hearing his name, Hee-won covered her mouth with her hands in horror, and Se-hyun said, "That's what a normal reaction looks like." Gamin, on the other hand, thought of Hyun-woo, who was ordered by this guy to do such a thing to Miss Han Kyung. In any case, no one dared to enter the student council room. Se-hyun added that they'd find a way to punish him if they found out he'd snuck in there. But Gamin insisted on his own, saying that a premonition told him the flash drive was there. They're using the flash drive video to blackmail Ji-woo, but only because they know her one weakness, her brother. Meanwhile, the guy decided to carry out his plan with the file to blackmail Ji-woo too. Fatty smiled smugly as he imagined Ji-woo doing whatever he told her to do. Gamin continued to watch him, covering his nose with his hand, for the guy had started smoking. He finally made up his mind and reached for the computer system unit. Suddenly, two guys, one of whom was Kyu-jin, entered the room, grudgingly taking off their uniforms. He asked the guy if he guarded the room well, calling him Piggy. Then he noticed his flash drive in the computer and laughed, saying that Piggy turned out to be quite the man. He suddenly asked if the man knew why he always called him a pig. It's because the one lives without using his brain, and with those words he threw him to the floor. He said he had a lot of courage since he wanted to blackmail his girlfriend too. His gaze was full of hatred, but he didn't continue, stepping away from the fat man. Ga-ming didn't interfere. He realized that Kyujin always left the flash drive here. Kyujin sat down at his computer, saying he'd do it today, and the guy beside him asked what he meant. He then explained that he was going to leak the video online to finally break GW up. He said promises are made to be broken, so now is the time. He presented the guy with a picture of the police taking her only brother to juvie. This would be an incredibly strong blow for Ji-woo, so she wouldn't be able to resist for long. Gamin remembered Haiwan's words that Hyun-woo, though a pain in the ass, was still her family. Se-hyun and Hyun were guarding at the entrance to the student council room, seeing that there were 3 students there at once right now. Se-hyun suggested that Hee-won play out a fight to get their attention and buy Gamin some time. He explained that the student council is always breaking up school fights because that's his job. He said that all Hyven has to do is call him a nasty word to start a conflict. Suddenly, someone called out to her from the stairs, and the guys saw Ji-woo Lee. Hanwol said it is more logical to contact a student's parents if the student is not in school than to question them. With one last look at Han Kyung, he said he was leaving. Lastly, he said that even if there was a good teacher here, no one would learn. Education is a means, not an end, and even if Hunwoo doesn't go back to school, she should just accept it. But Han Kyung only smiled at that, saying that she could teach him something herself. She said that even if he is on the edge of a cliff or having a hard time doing something good, no one should give up. Ga-ming came out of his hiding place, attacking one of the students. He turned around to Kyujin, who was sitting at his computer, intending to press the right button. Hanwol looked at her with disdain, saying that she appeared to be quite an interesting person. Kyujin shouted at Ga-ming in rage, saying that he had lost his head for daring to come here. He said he didn't think Ga-min was fit to be on the student council. And even if he beats up a couple of bullies, they still can't tell the difference between food and garbage. Or maybe it's the fact that he cares about Ji-woo too. He asked him about it. He said that was a perfectly logical explanation, considering he came here for the flash drive. Ga-min says that's not true, and the reason for his visit has nothing to do with his feelings for Ji-woo. Kyujin was sizing him up. He realized that the guy couldn't defeat Jae-hwang by pure chance. Then he offered him to fight like a real man, and the winner would get GW. He grabbed Ga-ming by the collar and executed a judo throw, dropping him to the floor. He was even surprised that it was easy, saying he was a wimp, not a man. But Gamin was not the least bit embarrassed by this, for everything had gone as he had planned, and he now reached for the flash drive. Taking it out, he was glad and even hoped to leave, avoiding a fight. Seeing what the man had done, Kyujin rushed towards him with words to hand over the flash drive. But Gamin couldn't allow her to be in his hands again, so he punched the one in the face. After recovering from the blow, Kyujin angrily shouted that he would be held accountable for everything he had just done. He lunged at him again, but Gamin dodged, this time seeing a good combination to attack. He grabbed Kyujin's thrown form and threw it on his face, thus immobilizing him. Then with one strong blow he knocked him out and flung himself toward the door. Kyujin collapsed next to the fat man he himself had thrown to the floor a few minutes ago. Gamin walked towards the door, expensively saying that the prize of their competition was Ji-woo. But you can't treat it like a commodity that you can just win. Unfortunately, Kyujin was already sitting at his computer, laughing madly. He said he had managed to download the video to his computer and was about to upload it to YouTube, so the flash drive was now useless. This made Gamin angry and wanted to lunge at Kyujin, but suddenly someone shouted at the door. It was Tom Kench, who also smelled cigarettes in the office. And then he noticed Gamin and asked what he was doing here and why the place was such a mess. He began to assess the situation suspiciously, looking at Gamin, and the latter began to panic. And then he saw Kyujin's battered face, and he finally understood everything. Sehun and Hee-won told Ji-woo about their plan, and she stood there looking at them in surprise. Hee-won apologized for doing it without her knowledge, saying she only wanted to help. But Ji-woo said it was pointless, since she herself would be the one to end it all. She thought about the fact that she'd told Hyven a bunch of comforting things. But now, as she silently tolerated all the things Hyven was experiencing, she felt foolish. She said she was sorry that Hyven saw her like that, so she would fix it herself. But she couldn't go into the student council office because a guy suddenly ran out of it. He was holding the system unit from his computer under his arm, with everything else dragging on the floor. Kyujin remembered resuming judo training 3 months ago. His friends thought it was because of the tension from the student council, but there was another reason. He was interested in one girl who was quite good, both in judo and looks. Ji-woo Lee was practicing in the same section as him, so he wanted to meet her. When he shared his intentions with his friends, he was laughed at. Everyone knew that Ji-woo was incredibly talented, even though judo was only a hobby for her. But the number of men she had fallen to the ground really couldn't be counted. She was even nicknamed Ronda Rousey for it, after the girl MMA fighter, but Kyujin didn't understand anything about it. He said she probably just hadn't had the chance to fight real men. To his surprise, Ji-woo was behind him and asked if he really wanted to fight. Kyujin was interested in this and asked what school she was from, and she replied that she was from Juisun. Upon hearing this, he was incredibly surprised, saying that he himself was also a student at this school. He introduced himself and held out his hand, but instead of a greeting, she grabbed it, nearly throwing him to the floor. He was shocked at the speed of her reflexes, looking at her in amazement. The girl snickered smugly. She let it be known that jokes were not good with her. Mocking him, she asked how such a man could be frightened of such a thing. He realized that she was testing him, but said that it was him that was being messed with, since he was on the student council. He'll find her weakness, and even if there isn't one, he'll create one himself. The upload was almost complete. All that was left was to wait for the video to hit YouTube. The indicator was showing 96% to the end of the download. Kyujin thought about the look on Ji-woo's face when everything finally happened. He looked at Gamin, but he was already gone, and Tom Kench shouted in horror for him to stop. It turned out that Gamin had snuck up on the computer and intended to unplug it. An instant later, the cable was ripped out, and Gamin had already run out of the classroom. He shoved the system unit under his arm, and all the other hardware dragged across the floor. Upon seeing Ji-woo, he told her to run away with him, saying that they should destroy it all. She didn't understand his words, thinking it was some crazy guy. However, Sehun understood. He realized that the flash drive didn't work out. Gamin said they just need to get to the gym, and then her suffering will end. He was still talking when he suddenly tripped over a mouse cord and all the hardware sprinkled beside him. Se-hyun, seeing that Tom Kench was on his way, decided to act on his own. He was only able to pick up a block and then flung himself to run as fast as he could. The caretaker, meanwhile, grabbed Ga-ming, saying that now he would be in trouble. To Kyujin, who had equaled them, he ordered him to catch Se-hyun. To the girls, he told them to go back to their class, but Ji-woo had other plans. Se-hyun critically assessed the situation, amazed at how Gamin was holding such a heavy weight under his arm. With his stamina, he wouldn't make it to the gym, which meant there was only one option left. It turned out to be the roof, where he soon found himself, catching his breath and preparing to drop the block. He pulled himself together and checked to see if anyone was downstairs so he wouldn't kill people. When he had already raised the block, Kyujin shouted at him not to dare to do so. He said that Se-hyun would be the next to go down if he threw off the block. Se-hyun looked at him fearfully, for it didn't look like he was joking. Kyujin added that he would limit himself to 3 slaps if he gave it to him nicely. But suddenly to himself, Se-hyun tossed the equipment, and that flew over the fence. Kyujin screamed in horror and lunged at Se-hyun, but was soon stopped. He was grabbed by Ji-woo and then made a sharp throw across himself. He hit his head on the concrete floor of the roof, but the girl didn't stop there. 8:50. The computer was broken, shattering on the ground. Ji-woo said she realized everything when the guy with glasses told her his plan. She said it was now her turn to blackmail him and prepared for a series of blows. Se-hyun stood and watched, nervously counting how many times she had already thrown him over. Kyujin had already started to say something about his defeat, but such an answer didn't satisfy Ji-woo. She gripped his arm, preparing to break it, and he cried out in terror that he was giving up. He said she was still a judoka and therefore couldn't do that, but she was of a different opinion. Fair play is only for athletes, she saw it as a hobby. Meanwhile, student council members rushed to get on the roof too. They thought the problem would be solved since Kyujin was involved. What was their surprise when they saw him kneeling? He apologized to some girl and the girl said that's what he should have said. She told him to lead a proper life from now on and not to dare touch her and her brother. A guy with a hood over his head showed up at the school gate with one hand in his pocket up to his elbow. The disciples watched in surprise as Tom Kench pulled the ear of the one who had beaten Jae-hwang on his own. They refused to believe it, but Ga-ming walked obediently, his thoughts occupied with something else. He thought of Se-hyun, hoping that he had taken care of the computer, and also thought about the fact that he still had the flash drive. It would have come in very handy, but slipping his hand into his pocket, he was horrified to find that he had lost it. He wanted to break free and rush out, but the caretaker held him firmly by the collar. The flash drive was indeed on the ground. He must have dropped it when he fell. Meanwhile, Haewon finished writing to her teacher and thought about Ji-woo. She wrote for Miss Han Kyung to come to them as soon as possible. Such was the instruction given to her by Se-hyun. But suddenly, she noticed a small object on the floor and was surprised to find that it was a flash drive. She reached out to pick it up, thinking how lucky she was to be the one to spot it. But suddenly someone leaned over and was the first to pick up the flash drive. Mi-hee-hwan looked at it with interest, remembering seeing such a thing at Kyujin's place. She looked at Haewon and asked what had happened here, but she couldn't answer. After that, she ran away, saying that it didn't matter, as she would just give Kyujin his little thing. She was getting farther away with each step, and Haewon stared at her, realizing in horror that she should stop her. She pulled herself together, for if nothing is done, all the efforts of the boys will be in vain. She shouted loudly throughout the hallway, calling Mi-hee-hwang a bitch and drawing attention. Then she pounced on her, remembering all the abuse she had suffered from her. She wanted to show her that she too could fight back and stand up for herself. All the moments when Mihi had hurt her flashed through her mind. And then she punched her in the face with her fist and the flash drive fell out of her hands. They both fell down, but Mi-hee-hwang got it more. She didn't even realize what just happened. Haewon couldn't believe she'd actually hit her for the first time in years either. Suddenly someone put a hand on her shoulder, telling her she was incredible. It was Ji-woo, who had already dealt with Kyujin, and was now being carried out of the roof, beaten. She patted Haewon on the shoulder, saying that she was now a true student of this school. Suddenly, a guy in a black hoodie and with a hood over his head dashed by Ji-woo. She was horrified to recognize him as her brother Hyun-woo, who was now running straight at Kyujin. He pulled his hand out of his pocket, and everyone saw the knife he was running at the guy with. Standing nearby, Han Kyung also saw this. She hurriedly prevented what he was about to do. Startled, she assessed the situation, for Hyun-woo's motive was quite obvious. Without a moment's hesitation, she found herself beside Kyujin, covering his body with her own. Hyun-woo didn't even suspect a similar development, but he couldn't stop now. The others watched in horror as he swooped down on Ms. Han Kyung with a knife. She remembered what had happened 2 days ago, Saturday night. When Shogun left, they were left standing alone, and Hyun-woo seemed to calm down a bit. The rest of the bullies started to leave, saying that Han-woo would be very displeased. That's when she realized where she had to start solving the problem. The next day, she asked at the library about this guy, but was advised not to ask about him. That's because he was feared here, because he was associated with the lead gang. Come to think of it, even the teachers had his back, fearing for their own lives. It was now obvious to her that the pernicious influence was coming from this gang and Han-woo Fi. It had not escaped this guy who was now standing in front of them. She asked Hyun-woo if it was Han-woo Fi who set him up to do something like this. But Hyun-woo didn't want to answer. He ran away from the battle scene, cursing someone. Gamin wanted to rush after him, but Han Kyung stopped him, saying that there was no need to do so now. For her, the question was whether Hyun-woo could get back on the right track. When she was outside the police station, Lee Hun-jae, a close friend of Hyun-woo's, caught her eye. The guy's distinctive ability turned out to be that without outside help, he was a coward. When he heard that Han Kyung wanted to report to the police, he fell to his knees, begging for forgiveness. Han Kyung approached him, saying she was willing to do it if he would help her with something. She wanted to know the whole story about Hyun-woo, so they sat down on a bench. Hunji said that he was actually a pretty smart guy. He had no parents, and therefore he was very ambitious in his studies. Upon hearing this, Han Kyung was surprised, asking what made him quit studying. Hongjae said it was all because of Ji-woo, his twin sister. He said she was also a student at their school, and it was the first time Han Kyung had heard her name. They lived in a Roth orphanage, but its connection to corruption was soon discovered and it went bankrupt. The twins had dreams and studied hard to go to university. They were forced to leave the shelter, for which they received 5 million won each. However, Hyun-woo's sister was not like the others. No matter what she took on, she always tried to be on top of her game. Hyun-woo said that's what made him stop studying. He realized that studying wasn't as important as making money. If he hadn't met Han-woo Fi, things would be different now. After all, he was doing his best for his sister. There aren't many places where an apprentice could work, so he took delivery. But many also conned him out of money, taking advantage of the fact that he is a minor. When he was a delivery boy, the guys from his part-time job introduced him to Han-woo Fi. In their first meeting, he created a 5 million won account for Hyun-woo on a gambling site. And in the blink of an eye, they turned into 10 million won. Because of this, he began to look at Han-woo Fi as his savior. But after joining his gang, he lost himself. He was constantly trying to get his attention, even when he was at school, which is why he started fighting. Hunji ended there, asking if she would denounce him now. And the next day, Sunday, she got a text message from him saying things were bad. He told her that Kyujin Kim cheated Hyun-woo, and that's why he lost all his money on the gambling site. Lee Hongjae looked worried. It was obvious that he was worried about his friend's fate. That's when he assumed that now, knowing the truth, Hyun-woo might do something stupid. Only now did he realize what he had done, and he jumped back in horror. Han Kyung grabbed her side, which was starting to bleed due to the stab wound. The students looked on with their mouths open, unable to say anything. But even so, Han Kyung kept thinking about them. She realized that Han-woo Fi was the engine of the whole process. He stood on the stairs and saw the police coming up the stairs. He thought his plan had been accomplished, and now Hyun-woo would be finished. But to his surprise, the police did not go further up the floor, but stopped, surrounding him. The inspector asked if he was Han-woo Fi, and the inspector realized it was all Miss Han Kyung. She wanted to expel him from this school, even though she was only a temporary teacher. One of the investigators named Tae-mang-na approached him, saying they should ask him a couple questions. But Han-wol said he knew him, pointing out his position, and then said he had to go. He thought that it seemed like that conversation with Han Kyung was for a reason, and she was hatching some kind of plan. This made him smile evilly. He realized that he had underestimated Han Kyung. Tam Kench had already pulled Gamin towards the teacher's lounge, from which the principal was just coming out. The caretaker started to talk about Ga Ming breaking into the student council room, but he didn't care. He said it's not the time for that and we need to call an ambulance to the school. He mentioned something about Ms. Han Kyung, and Gamin was seized with panic. The students looked at Ms. Han Kyung and she said that Hyun-woo wants to study too, right? He stood there staring, unable to believe he had just stabbed a man for the first time. A small pool of blood had already formed on the floor and was getting bigger. He suddenly began to feel nauseous, and he wondered with horror what would happen now. He remembered Han-wol telling him that Kyujin had tricked him. Then he was the one who gave him that knife, saying that now he could avenge his sister. He said that a lousy guy like Kyujin definitely deserved to be punished. And who, if not Hyun-woo, will be able to restore justice? He said he had nothing to lose because he was going to jail anyway. But suddenly his thoughts were interrupted by Han Kyung, as if she had intervened from nowhere. She took his face in her hands, telling him he was wrong, for all was not yet lost. She said not to worry and to remember her saying she would help him quit smoking. It is not easy to do this, yet there are those who do it. They say people can never really change, but there are still individuals who can. Hyun-woo was touched by her words, but he dismissed her hands, saying that it was no longer possible for him. And then he was hit. It turned out to be Gamin, who rushed over as fast as he could. Seeing him, Hyun-woo realized that he couldn't even escape now. But Ga-ming said, "You don't need a fall that others have pushed you to. Better to ask why exactly he fell, and if he can do that, he's not hopeless yet." These were Bruce Lee's words that Ga-ming wrote down in his diary. Han Kyung joined in, saying that she believes Hyun-woo can be a good teacher. The guy looked at her in amazement, asking how she knew. She said she saw his career goals from high school. It turned out that he and Ji-woo both wanted to be teachers. She teased him back then, saying that it couldn't be with his temper. Said if he wanted to be a teacher, he should treat everyone equally. And he told her that she better worry about her grades, and it hurt her. Then he said, however, not to worry, for he would help her. Han Kyung advanced toward him again and said that he shouldn't give up. She will definitely make this school a much better place to learn. Then she lost consciousness and collapsed, and blood kept pouring out of her. Luckily, the ambulance had already arrived. The doctors were running down the hall. Hyun-woo realized he was crying because of what he had done. He even felt ashamed. Lowering himself to the floor, he said that he was sorry, but he couldn't help Han Kyung anymore. Ji-woo put her hand on his shoulder, telling him that he should apologize on his own. Fortunately, Ms. Han Kyung soon woke up, but had to stay in the ward for a while longer. Even then, she worried about the study group, telling Ga-min that everything was in his hands now. He told her not to worry, for they were sure to recruit 3 more. Ji-woo agreed to be one of them, because studying was quite important to her. The guys were waiting for her and said hello when the door opened, but it wasn't Ji-woo. Han Wol-fi entered the room, whom they were certainly not expecting. He said hello too, and then said he wished to join their group. Hearing this, Ga-min and Se-hyun were greatly surprised, for it looked suspicious. As Ji-woo approached their meeting place, she thought back to her meeting with Haiwan yesterday. She first came with her brother to the station, where he told her about his assault on the teacher. To her surprise, he was relieved for a while, and that made her angry. She shook him, scolding him for stopping studying and being like this. Said she was now going to study hard and get a scholarship. Next, they were already sitting with Haiwan, where she said she knew she was moving. She asked how soon her friend was going to leave her. She added that she learned this from a weak prickle, referring to Se-hyun. Said she wanted to keep in touch with Haiwan, but she was quick to reassure her and said that she was no longer transferring to another school. It turned out that Dad had some problems at work, so the move had to be postponed. It meant they could still see each other in and out of school. She had already reached the right booth when she suddenly saw Han Wulfai. He once again asked Gamin if he would accept him into his study group. Gamin didn't think for long. He looked him straight in the eyes, then asked his name, and Se-hyun thought the man was crazy to accept someone like Hanwul, but Gamin said he refuses to accept it. It was obvious that Hanwul wasn't too surprised when asked the reason for his decision. Gamin said the reason for this is his eyes, in which he sees nothing to do with the desire to learn. But that didn't satisfy Hanwul. He said he wanted to hear a more objective reason. Then Gamin said bluntly that it's because Hanwul is a bad guy. Thoth looked at him unhappily, thinking that things had turned out a little differently than he had wanted. He said he thought about helping him, but since he wasn't accepted, Gamin chose the hard path himself. He was still talking when suddenly Se-hyun noticed something flying through their window. A second later, bricks sprinkled into the room, one of them even hitting Se-hyun. At that moment, Ji-woo had just walked in, so she too was hit with a barrage of bricks. Gamin looked out the window and saw a group of freshmen standing below. Hanwul asked if he knew what Jae-wang and Kyujin, whom Gamin had beaten up, had in common. They were both sophomores, which meant that Gamin had broken an unspoken rule of the school. It consisted of never fighting over ranks. By doing this, he drew attention to himself, making the other students think they were weak. He was already called a monster as it was, and the rumors of his strength were growing rapidly. They were distributed by those who got to see it in action, and it has become the most discussed topic among the freshmen. A guy named Kang Taeho wasn't thrilled about it, as he was the strongest of the freshman class. Hanwul left the classroom, saying that if he were a member of the group he could help, but Gamin refused him. Meanwhile, Kang Taeho came under the school's assignment, demanding that Gamin come down. Toth asked why and refused to clear things up with him with a fight. But the guy wasn't satisfied with that. He said they had to figure out who was stronger. Gamin then replied that he could tell everyone that he was stronger. Kang Taeho asked his men where that fool Jong was, and they brought some guy over. The one actively resisted. It was obvious he was clearly not happy about it. Kang Taeho said that this guy has taken to studying lately. He even wrote a sign-up form for an extracurricular activity, which made him very angry. He said it was all because of Gamin's spongy influence and started tearing up his uniform. And then, suddenly to everyone, Gamin jumped off the windowsill. He flew straight at Kang Taeho. He successfully squirmed and then punched him in the face with his fist. Chan watched all of this, remembering how he himself was pretty good at fighting guys. He was doing it to raise his rank because that's the kind of rules that apply here. The higher the rank, the better your life in school. He had to be sure to meet someone. So Lee Jong just had to keep winning, to become so much stronger to be around one person. He saw Gamin easily fell Kang Taeho and realized that this was his chance. Gamin snatched the registration form from Kang Taeho's hands. But the latter was not so simple and also grabbed his arm and then performed a hold. He said Gamin just caught him by surprise by jumping down from the second floor. But Gamin was, as always, as flat as ever, sitting and studying Lee Chong's registration form. Kang Taeho didn't realize at first whether this guy was really that strong or just dumb. He tapped him on the back of the head, and Gamin's glasses flew off of him. He told him to focus, after all. He was challenging the first rank. He also said he was talking about punishment for anyone holding such trash. But this Gamin couldn't stymie. He jumped up and smacked him in the jaw. Kang Taeho seemed to be caught off guard again. He fell to the ground. His eyes went dark and someone even said he passed out. Gamin said he didn't have time to fight him. No matter how strong a man is, he is still defenseless against a bullet. That was the only way to describe the difference between the two. But even at this moment, Shogun managed not to give away his thoughts. Gamin turned around to Lee Chong, telling him to join them. He seemed to be over the moon that he had such a chance. But disappointment soon came. Gamin turned him down for his motive was fighting, not studying. He said this group is for learning, not rank promotion. Lee Chong couldn't believe that he was being rejected. He decided not to give up. At first, he said he would learn too, meaning combat training, but then he humbled himself by saying that since that was the case, he would also like to do some studying. Gamin opened the door right in front of him and asked with a strange face if he was joking. Li Zhong didn't realize it at first, but then said he wasn't lying, of course. A minute later, he was already sitting in their room in front of a stack of books. Gamin says they're going to go see Ms. Han Kyung, which is his assignment before they arrive. Li Chong didn't understand why such a guy was so eager to learn, but he decided not to let him down. And if he has to sweat for it now, he's only too happy to do it. There was a draft in the study, and one of the sheets flew to the floor. He bent down to pick it up as a man suddenly appeared in the doorway and asked if he was Yun Ga-ming. He was the one in charge of bringing new people into the YB family. Li Chong stared at him in amazement, for this establishment meant a great deal. It was connected to the white lead gang, and the man told him to follow him. Li Chong hesitated. He didn't think the opportunity would come so quickly. But he didn't want to let Gamin down either, as it would be a betrayal on his part. He decided he couldn't endanger his future teacher. But at the last moment, personal motives outweighed, and he followed the man. When Gamin came to the study, he did not find Li Chong. The shogun was standing nearby, though, and asked if he wanted to know where the man had gone. The sturdy man looked at Li Chong, and he swallowed nervously, already regretting his deception. As he rode in the car, the man told him that their school had always been known for strong guys. He said something further, but Li Chong wasn't listening. It was more important to him that he didn't realize that he wasn't Ga-ming. He remembered a kid in his class bragging about becoming a member of the White Lead, humiliating him. It made him angry. He told himself that he was bound to become successful too. Their car passed near the hospital where Ji-woo and Se-hyun were just coming out of. After noticing the car, Ji-woo thought about something, but then said it wasn't important. She asked where Gamin had gone, and Se-hyun replied that he had run a little ahead. Gamin read the note that Li Chong had left before he left, and he couldn't believe that he had left them. But then he turned his attention to the books, concluding that he had been studying. It looked like he had been practicing before he left, and Ga-ming even decided to check his robot. He was surprised to notice that the man had done pretty well. At that moment, Shogun Park, who was watching everything from the sidelines, walked in. He revealed that Li Zhong is not in a very favorable position right now, which, however, he chose himself. Li Chong felt creepy, but he thought that was how it was supposed to be in this place. The man introduced himself as Oh Chang-hong, saying he was now at the test site. In order to qualify for the White Lead group, Li Zhong had to take the car keys. It's fairly simple, but by no means easy, and he soon realized why. He looked at the man and then saw what he would have to deal with. These guys just recently graduated and will go to any lengths to keep him out of it. A regular member of the Jang Bihuan gang, specializing in robbery. A regular member of the Kuk Guanu gang, specializing in direct violence. A regular member of the Saoub gang, specializing in assassination attempts. Oh Chang-hong added that if he passes the screening, he will get more than just gang membership. He'll also be able to get his hands on that car, the keys to which he needs to get his hands on. He said people always make it sound like gangsters never live a normal life, but it's only their false hopes. In the end, it all comes down to money and power. You can't achieve success by studying alone. Everyone should realize that. He told him not to even think about the methods and just get the keys. Li Zhong remembered a guy saying similar words about success. So he took this man's word for it and started fighting. So what's worse than him, Li Zhong, if he can't do the same thing? He won't chicken out even if there are 3 people there. With these thoughts, he rushed into battle. He took a swing at the first guy, but as it turned out, his strength wasn't enough. It was quite late when it was over. Just as He Chung-hong had anticipated, the guy didn't make it. He said he thought the guys in Yuisan were pretty strong, but I think he overestimated the brat's abilities. The 3 regular members left the scene of the battle. They were satisfied with the victory. He Chung-hong picked up the metal pipe and said that he shouldn't have let his emotions get the best of him. He said he brought him here because he liked his stubborn pretense. But did he really think that the White Lead didn't know what the real Ga-ming looked like? He ordered him to lie on his stomach, and he'd better do it nicely, or he'd be in trouble. Glancing at his watch, he told the time. It was 15 to 9. Result: White Lead membership test failed. He swung around, preparing to bring the weight of the metal down on him. One of the regulars was suddenly attacked by punching him in the head. The impact was pretty hard. He was thrown back. The attackers turned out to be Ji-woo and Shogun, who swarmed on the other gang members as well. He Changhong froze with his pipe, glaring at whoever was approaching. Jiwoo said the scary uncle was beating someone, calling him a criminal. Shogun said he just had to talk to him since he was in charge of recruiting at White Lead. Gamin was there too. He even grabbed Lee Chong's answer sheet. He showed it to Lee Chong, saying that he passed and scored 24 points. Lee Chong looked at him with a battered face, not understanding why he had come here. The Shogun said that this place is looking for talented people to turn them into bandits. That's when they met outside the parking garage, Gamin, Jiwoo, and Shogun Park. They were surprised and started asking each other why they were here. Gamin was going to save Lee Chong, and Jiwoo just listened to her intuition. The Shogun brought Gamin here because he thought he'd be useful. He said that surely Lee Jong came here of his own free will. But Gamin objected, saying that he must have had a good reason. To back up his words, he showed the sheet with his answers, saying that he had promised to study. It was also important that he actually tried, not just guessing. So he thinks he had some reason to come here. He told Lee Chong that he passed the test, showing him his answer sheet. Changhong looked at them, especially focusing on Gamin. From what he'd seen, they were friends of that Juisun brat. Jiwoo also called him a criminal, telling him to keep quiet. It surprised him a little. It was like they weren't afraid at all. But then he said that reporting to the police would have no effect. The law couldn't do anything to him. It was useless. After hitting Lee Chong, he said that only pain can teach life. Pain generates power, which is the source of power. Jiwoo shrieked when she saw the metal pipe he had hit with. Lee Chong fell to the ground without strength, and he continued to talk about power. Putting his foot on Lee Chong, he said why he wasn't even ashamed. It's because respect only comes with money. Gamin and Shogun no longer had any patience, preparing to attack the man. But Jiwoo shouted for those to watch out, as the regular members were already rushing at them from behind. Gamin and Shogun didn't notice this and rushed to attack, but to no avail. What was to be expected, one of the bandits pushed their heads together. They fell down, and Jiwoo was annoyed at such a brash view of the battle. She turned on the bandits with anger, intending to tackle it alone. To one, she told him that she had twisted his arm once before, and he only called her names in response. He said that apparently the disciples of Juisun still think they are better than that. Then he swung at Jiwoo, but she managed to see the attack coming. She deftly ducked and the blow went past her, and she prepared to retaliate. She was furious at the way he called her names, and she grabbed his hand for a hold. At that moment, the guy regretted his words, instantly finding himself on the ground. He winced at the unbearable pain he felt from her intake. The other bandit, meanwhile, hit the spot where Shogun had been lying a second ago with a stick. He said it's not fair to hit first and then get away with it. After all, it would be only fair for the Shogun to feel the same way he did to him. He shouted that using guns was his thing and swung his stick. But Shogun noticed that he was just waving around, which meant he wasn't wielding a weapon. But he swung really hard, one hit, and it could end badly. He threw his hood over himself and quickly pulled something from his jacket. Then, dodging another blow, he attacked. He hit the guy in the jaw, and he fell back 2 meters because the blow was strong. The Shogun won because he knew his weapons. Clutching his knuckles in his hands, he said in complete solidarity with his words about your opponent that should feel the same way. He Changhong watched the whole spectacle while keeping his eyes on Gamin. Of them all, he was the only one who was a true first ranger. But now he was approached by a new opponent, a guy named Coub. He was a psychopath who was particularly violent, and right now he pulled out a knife. Looking at Lee Chong, he said that the type of guy like him gets scared when he realizes that they will have to deal with pain they can see. He attacked Gamin with a knife, but the latter suddenly grabbed him with Lee Chong's test sheet. Gamin told him that knowledge was stronger than the knife he was waving around like that. Suddenly, he yanked the paper to the side and the knife jumped out of Coub's hands. After that, Gamin hit the guy with his trademark punch to the stomach. Toth fell to the ground, clutching his stomach. It was obvious he was in a lot of pain. Yoon Gamin, a boy from Yusun High School, defeats another bandit. He now threw himself at Chong, but the latter effortlessly spoiled his blow. He asked Gamin what this knowledge he spoke of was. Gaming noticed that the man was strong, perhaps even stronger than he thought. He said that Gamin was wrong to underestimate him, and Shogun realized that he would be in trouble now. Changhong said the boys are turning out to have a strong friendship. He grabbed his stick and hit Gamin, but he managed to block. The man then hit him in the stomach and then again with a stick, and Gamin fell down. Ji Woo rushed to his aid, but Shogun thought it best not to interfere. Changhong said that with that attitude, they have zero chance. He hit both of them at once, and Shogun was kicked. Ji Woo painfully fell on her stomach. She couldn't get up right away. Changhong laughed at them, saying that he stood in one place and still beat them. After all, until you teach your arrogance a lesson, you can't die. But that's why he liked the Yusen kids. He pulled out a lighter, about to light a cigarette because he thought it was over. He talked about his robot, saying that he is always tasked with finding good kids. But the semester had just started, he thought, which was why. The original gangster is Yoon Gamin. Since this guy was biding his time, he let his guard down by lighting a cigarette. But he, Changhong, used his right foot far more often. He hit Gamin again and he fell on his back, which was quite dangerous. He told him that he turned out to be a tactician, only pity he was in a hurry. But Gamin only exhaled with his inherent indifference. It was strange in a situation like this, and Changyong wondered what it could have been beating. Remembering the moment with Lee Chong, Gamin told him that it was about the leg. He made him attack specifically with his right on purpose to get it away from Lee Chong. Gamin said that there was nothing to step on since he had already hit it with the pipe. The man laughed, saying that Gamin was quite brave. He added that their gang has a very good friendship with each other, but he better not say that. At the word gang, Gamin corrected him, saying that they were a training group. He repeated himself, saying that they were not a gang, but a training group. The man didn't understand why this made him so angry. He said that Gamin had better not pounce. But Gamin had already taken a special stance, remembering how he had learned how to do this punch. He bounced off the ground, and what Changhong saw next was simply hard to describe in words. Meanwhile, at the police station, the cops were outraged about something. Their attention was drawn to police officer Na Taemin, who works in the criminal police department. It looked like someone had pissed him off pretty badly. Investigator Hwang Do-gyeon, Juvenile and Women's Division, approached him. He asked if Hanwol was the reason he was so angry, and Taemin looked at him with an angry look. He had just gotten a new assignment, but he was already overzealous. A colleague said troubled high school students are his department's concern. But Taemin quipped, telling him that they're all flat out doing nothing there. Ms. Han Kyung's case really wasn't his department, but still. He was referring to the plan to capture White Lead leader Phai Yong-baek. He said he had high hopes for his son Phai Han-wul. He left the station before he even had a chance to go in because the commander let him go right away. And the bastard smiled and walked out like it had happened before. He even knew who he was, Taemin, and wasn't that weird. His colleague agreed, saying that there is indeed something incomprehensible here. Taemin then asked him if he was sure the precinct was operating properly. Hwang Do-gyeon said he was just being nonsensical, however, Taemin didn't think so. Suddenly, he saw two schoolboys heading towards the station. Looking at their faces, he thought that this was what a normal reaction should be. He thought that if he wanted to catch Hanwol, he'd have to find someone who knew enough about him. Someone whose capture won't be particularly significant to this organization. I wonder where he would find such a person. Gamin prepared to apply something he hadn't practiced in quite some time. Lee Jong recalled his friend telling him not to look for him anymore. Then Chan desperately shouted that they had made a deal, right? The guy he was saying this to, he called Auntie, but he didn't even look in his direction. He said to understand him correctly, in all their 2 years of friendship, he had never considered him his rival. This was a big blow to Chan, because with this guy they had once decided to be friends and rivals. Now he lay battered on the floor, realizing that Auntie had been right. He was no match for anyone, and his defeat is testament to that. He looked around, thinking that Gamin and friends had already escaped, and he didn't blame them for that. But suddenly he heard a familiar voice, and then he couldn't believe his eyes. Changhong flew straight at him and beat him with a metal pipe. Now the same man tripped over the lying Lee Chong and fell down. The one who had sent him there with a single blow turned out to be Gamin. The man collapsed heavily on the ground, stumbling over Chong's body. Li Chong covered his eyes with his hands because of the pain that overtook his battered back. But then On Chang Hong kicked him in the jaw and told him to stay out of the way. Li Chong rolled on the floor, but suddenly someone stopped him. The man, meanwhile, had taken off his jacket. Now he was serious. He humiliated Li Chong in every way possible, saying that the brat couldn't even fight. And so Gamin would only be in the way, but the guy thought otherwise. Li Chong said that the man was right, as he had really gotten everyone in trouble. Though he hated to admit it, he gave in to temptation at that moment. He ended his confession by telling Gamin to leave him alone, but he still sat beside him. He remembered his training with his favorite teacher who taught him in secret from his mother. Back then, Gamin often used dirty techniques because he got a low grade in school. He lamented to his coach that his improvement was only in kung fu and not in his studies. Then the coach told him to try another method of learning: books. Something that sells the desire to try harder, helping change for the better and promoting improvement. Gamin didn't understand his words back then, thinking that the coach was talking about some kind of magic. This made the coach laugh. He said that in fact, Gamin already possessed this magic. That's why he thinks he always wants to defeat him. He said there is so much in the world that will improve with him, and there is sure to be one in it, a worthy opponent. A flurry of punches rained down on He Chang Hong, for this was the very same forbidden technique. The words about the opponent Gamin said out loud, so Li Chong thought he was talking about him. He remembered the words of Auntie, who had said that he never considered him as his rival. He then thought of Kang Taiho, who had also uttered similar words about rivalry. The technique consisted of 2 stages, the first of which was a barrage of 1,000 punches. The next step was a critical hit on vital organs. The technique was forbidden by his uncle due to Gamin abusing it during sparring. It was the first technique of its kind that Gamin personally invented. The final stage was to get it in one single blow. Even though it was done with the fingers of the palm of the hand, the effect was incredible. And it was called a unilateral attack, ending any fight in a moment. He Chang Hong was pushed away enough that he fell onto the machine he had put here himself. Li Chong thought about what he had seen at school, realizing that it was just a warm-up for Gamin, and such an amazing guy considered him his rival. Out of joy, he didn't know what to do with himself, so he just looked at his friend in delight. He shouted for Auntie to see what a strong friend he had now. Shogun and Ji Woo, meanwhile, had finished with the permanent members. He Chang Hong was also lying on the car, by all appearances unconscious. And Gamin thought that now, there were 5 people in their group. He was glad that their study group would now be able to fully function. But suddenly, the fun was cut short by the sound of the engine of that very car. Suddenly to everyone, she shifted, tossing He Chanyong into the air. The guys didn't understand at first how this was possible, since no one had been there before. But Li Chong remembered Chanyong's strange words, who had mentioned something about a 4th member. That was the 4th person, a regular member of the White Lead. Ji Woo rubbed the spot where she had landed and was angry for knocking herself out with one punch. The Shogun was already on his feet, watching as Gamin dealt with He Chang Hong. He envied his strength, for if he himself had been a little stronger than his mother. Ji Woo cut his thoughts short by asking who he even was. He replied to her that he had personal issues with Chung-hun, which was why he was here. He took Gamin with him because he's a good fighter. They saw that Li Chong had also woken up, and it seemed that they could go back now. Ji Woo, however, didn't quite believe Shogun's words, asking if that was the only reason. He didn't understand what she meant, but the girl didn't have time to explain and suddenly squealed loudly. Now they too saw the car that was driving straight at Gamin with Li Chong. The latter was startled to recognize the guy sitting behind the wheel. It was Auntie. Chan tried to grab Gamin and throw him back, but he was too weak. Gathering the last of his strength, he still shoved him and jumped back. He made it just in time, and the car whizzed by within a few centimeters of them. Reaching the middle of the parking lot, she turned around, wheels squeaking. The guys asked each other if everyone was okay, and it turned out everyone was, unless you counted He Chang Hong. Ji Woo was furious, cursing the guy who almost ran them over. But Shogun said it was more like willful driving. Auntie called out to Gamin, asking him if he wanted to get involved with crime. With his skills, he could join the YB family right away, bypassing permanent membership. He went on to describe to him all the delights of a life of crime. But when asked about his decision, Gamin, without thinking, said he was refusing. He said it wasn't for him and that he'd rather focus on his studies. Taemin asked the students what they were doing here, and they said they were worried about their friends. Altogether, they were going to go to university and study diligently. Anti remembered that those did say something about their study group. Finding that it wasn't idle chatter, he looked at Lee Chong. Suddenly, his face became like a psychopath's. He said he had memorized them. That look made it clear to Chan that his friend had lost his mind, for he had never seen him like that before. That's the impact White Lead had on its members. Anti suddenly noticed Shogun and said it was funny to meet him here as well. Went to his mother's place of employment even though she was killed in this way. Had he decided to follow in her footsteps and devote himself to useless studies? Gamin remembered what Shogun had said about his mother when he wanted to beat up Hyunwoo. Matching the words anti, it appeared that his mother was a teacher in Juisun. Anti added that he thought he was hatching a revenge plan, but he was just studying. That man will be very pleased that the Shogun is not going to retaliate against him. After that, he said goodbye and turned the car around to leave. Taemin interrogated them if they had really seen their friend in that car. They said GW saw it, and he muttered that she had good instincts. Suddenly they saw a car drive out of the building and some guy ran out after it. His friends didn't believe he would be able to chase the anti since he didn't have a car. But Shogun wasn't bothered by that. He was already getting on the motorcycle standing next to him. He followed anti, chased by a sense of responsibility because he had mentioned his mom. Investigator Techman thought he'd seen this guy somewhere before. Shogun was beyond angry. He had to grab Auntie by all means. But why was he going to Sando? Unfortunately, there was heavy car traffic here. He hit a red light and Auntie's car managed to pass. There was no choice. Shogun turned onto the sidewalk, thinking he could still catch up. He turned into an alley and saw that he could get back on the road if he drove through here. He even saw the anti-car again for a moment, which hadn't gotten far away. Suddenly, someone jumped out from behind the house and grabbed Shogun, throwing him out of the saddle. At high speed, the motorcycle flew into the fence, its wheels still spinning. Sanguine Bang stood in front of the guy and said that he could finally repay him for Jae Wang. He said he knew all along that Shogun was getting their White Lead guys. Gamin had a bad feeling when Shogun rushed after Anti. He remembered his eyes when he wanted to put a crowbar in Hyunwoo's mouth for not knowing who killed his mom. The same expression he had now, he looked like a maniac. Taking out his knuckles, he lunged at Sanguine Bang, intending to even kill if he had to. Then he was still standing there drinking coffee, waiting for the person on the other end of the phone to pick up. He was answered by the answering machine, saying the caller was out of range, and that made him angry. Turns out he called Jae Wang, but he didn't answer him, as he always does in principle. But it wasn't surprising, after all, he'd been beaten into such a state. He later told Sanguine that he was going to go to university because that was all that was left. After a smack from that bespectacled boy, he had no place in their school anymore. He also added that he saw that teacher's son as he lay in the ward. After she died, all he did was go around beating up everyone involved with White Lead. Sanguine Bang then said he would go and beat the creep, but Jae Wang advised him to be careful with him. He added that he had heard about Kyujin's defeat to the same bespectacled man. Hearing that name, Sanghin remembered Hanwol saying something similar. Except his reaction was quite different, for he thought they were all just a bunch of trash. Sanguine Bang was not like that. He was determined to avenge his comrades. He thought he absolutely had to find this guy. Should have been so lucky, he saw the one he was looking for just pass him by. That's how he'd tracked him down. And now the brat was standing in front of him, saying something about his revenge. He looked at him in disgust, for he did not yet understand what he would do. Seeing his frantic gaze, he realized what Jae Wang was talking about. But Sanguine thought that he was just scared of it, that's why he lost. Shogun lunged at him, swinging his knuckles to strike. Sanguine thought that it looked like the kid had good form and fighting spirit. He planted his knuckle-dustered fist right into his stomach, but he didn't budge. It didn't matter what shape the guy was in, he needed to get pumped up. After all, An egg that has fallen to the ground is basically always broken. He hit Shogun with a knee to the jaw and he flew backwards. He fell to the pavement, crying out in pain, but he didn't lose consciousness. He didn't understand why his opponent didn't even flinch from his blow. What kind of body did he have anyway? Here he was, already looming over him again. He mocked Shogun's words about going to avenge his mother. Suddenly, Shogun noticed the bags of trash behind him, and he had a plan. Sangin, meanwhile, continued to mock his words. He reminded him that the news had reported it as an accident, not a murder. That it came from banal alcohol intoxication, but Shogun shouted for him to take a drag. He said that's not how his mom died. It was murder. Grabbing the package, he said it happened because of the revenge of one of their gang members. He threw the bag at Sangin, but it was poorly tied, so all the contents sprinkled while still in the air. Sanguine only had time to put his arm out before everything came crashing down on him. He was angry and asked the guy what he was getting up to by throwing trash at him. As soon as they were cornered, the roof was blown off. But having said that, he almost lost his right eye. Something sharp flew past his face, grazing his cheek. Shogun, meanwhile, armed himself with a tin can lid. Before Sangin realized, he saw his foot near his face. And then a blow followed, and he fell to the pavement. Shogun landed safely and rushed to his bike. He said he didn't have time to mess around with his mountain of muscle. But suddenly he found that there was no key in the bike. It must have come loose. This was bad, for he had no idea where to find him now. That was enough time for Sanguine to get to his feet, and he grabbed him by the scruff of the neck. Then he threw the guy, tossing him back to the trash bags. He pulled out his phone, deciding to check one message from someone. It was from Auntie, asking for help with a guy who was on his tail. But Sanjin was worried about something else. Shogun knew too much about their gang. For this, he found only one explanation. There was a spy among them. He took Shogun's face with one hand, asking who he had sent to them. Police officers had already arrived on the scene, and one girl was describing how it all went down. She said one guy dragged the other guy somewhere, saying he'd knock the other guy's teeth out if he didn't confess. Someone picked up the keys to a motorcycle, saying he had already put his life in danger by becoming a spy. Now is the time to act, but we must try not to give ourselves away. Gamin was returning home. He lived in Songdo, so there was no need to go far. Suddenly, he saw a man on a motorcycle shouting his name, asking for help. Gamin was surprised to see who was in front of him. After all, he had met this person before. The police put the felons from the range into cars, and Taemin supervised the process. They caught regular members of the White Lead gang, and they're dangerous. He smoked a cigarette, thinking of those who had managed to deal with them. One of them was just standing in the back. She suddenly said that the place reeked strongly of cigarettes. He turned around, seeing that they were all still standing there, obviously wanting something from him. So they wanted him to find that kid on the motorcycle. But then things could get complicated, he told them. He wasn't going to chase after someone just because of some premonition. But Gamin chose not to mention the expression on Shogun's face when it came to his mom. Ji Woo also spoke up, saying that he's not a kid anymore, let him do what he wants. Taemin pointed at On Chang Kong, asking if they had knocked him out. Li Zhong answered for all of them, saying that Gamin was the one who distinguished himself the most. Tekman couldn't believe it, for a high school kid to single-handedly defeat a real criminal. That meant he'd finally gotten to someone in this gang. He realized that Gamin was an unusual person, though it was not immediately noticeable. Suddenly, he said, the guys had forgotten something important after all. They really did something wrong that they shouldn't have done. Li Ji-woo and Yoon Gamin, he addressed them, saying they should be arrested for violence. That's when Li Zhong intervened, saying that he was to blame for what happened. Gamin remembered Han Kyung saying the same thing. Violence should not be tolerated. The investigator nodded in agreement, and Li Chong had to stop Ji-woo. But then Taemin said that's if state agencies are working properly. He couldn't divulge details, but as the foundation of their society, the police had cracked. Gamin remembered Shogun talking about something similar. So, he said, as an investigator he had nothing to praise them for. But he couldn't scold about anything either. Instead, he apologized. For letting a criminal walk free in their school. He gave Gamin his business card, saying he could dial him any time. It didn't matter how strong they were. One day it might be needed. And first of all, he spoke of the evil servant, thinking of one man. He looked at the boys once more, telling them to study hard. And then they drove out. He was sitting in the car talking to somebody on the phone. He wished the man well and asked if he knew a guy named Shogun. Hearing the answer, he realized it wasn't surprising when the man seemed familiar. Then he asked once more about the study group that Gamin had set up. He said their leader overpowered one of the bandy members who was recruiting disciples from Uisan. Hearing about Gamin, the person on the other end of the wire became worried. It was Han Kyung. She said if all went well, they could get closer to Hanwul. Taemin marveled at Gamin, who had climbed into such a place to save a friend. He said that if this continues, things will change for Uisan. Han Kyung asked the investigator to continue to monitor the situation. Meanwhile, the guys were getting ready to go home after such a busy evening. Gamin said he should go in the direction Shogun went since he lives in Songdo. They said goodbye, and the boys told him to be careful. But he had a bad feeling about Shogun. He was hoping he'd be okay when suddenly he saw a guy he definitely didn't expect to meet. It was Piggy, aka Do-hun Jung, of the Mechanical Engineering Department. He said he feigned weakness in the room then, but it was necessary. Gaming remembered how he had tried to copy Ji-woo's file. But Do-hun stopped him, saying that, in fact, he was going to remove it. But now there were bigger problems. The Shogun could die at any moment. Now that he said it, the bike did look like the one Shogun had. Gamin was about to jump in with Do-hun when suddenly someone called him. His mom called, and naturally she yelled at him, telling him to be home in an hour. She reminded him that she had been against his enrollment at this school because of the kids that attended here. She didn't object then, saying only that she didn't want him to get into trouble. But if he doesn't come home immediately, she will transfer him to another school. Do-hun was waiting for him on the other side, for they needed to save the Shogun. Do-hun hurried him along, saying they had very little time. Somewhere in the garage, a few people were talking about Shogun. Among them was Sang-hin Ban, who was trying to make a joke of the others. The guy with the dreadlocks said that Shogun still hasn't told him who the spy is. Sanguin asked why those people obeyed him, to which the guy replied that he had promised them something. Shogun meanwhile sat there, thinking that if Gamin came now, he would be saved. For now, he decided to focus on those guys' conversation. But the guy with the dreadlocks turned out to be pretty smart and stopped talking. He leaned over to Shogun, saying that if he didn't want to name the spy, it is quite possible that he will see his dear mom today. Suddenly, someone kicked the door with their foot, and a man's shadow appeared in the room. 1413. Shogun thought of Ga-min with some hope, but it was not him. The man said Ga-min is currently at home doing homework. He turned to Shogun, saying it had been a long time ago, but then interrupted. First, we had to finish off the bandits who had gathered in this room. Sanguin Bang clenched his fists in anger. Somewhere he had seen this man's face before. Meanwhile, at the station, one of his co-workers asked where he was disappearing to. I just caught one of the white lead gang and I'm already flushed. The man asked, recalled Tekman's words, and said he had no idea where he was being carried. Seeing how his answer didn't particularly satisfy his colleague, he once again assured that he really didn't know. Perhaps the problems with Phi Hanwul and his bad vibe were to blame. Shogun stared in wonder at what was happening in front of his eyes. At first glance, the unremarkable investigator fought as well as Ga-ming. It couldn't help but be impressive, for he truly possessed a mastery of combat. Not 5 minutes later, screams and moans of pain were heard from the room. The guy with the dreadlocks, as well as Sanguin Ban, went out the back door. They rushed to the car standing outside the garage and jumped in. Sanguin was a little puzzled that they were getting off, but his friend said they'd better stay out of it here. Plus, the man who arranged all this looked pretty familiar. Sanguin Bun was definitely sure he had seen it somewhere before, and then it came to him. He was one of Hanwul's blacklist targets, investigator Na Taemin. He was added to this list relatively recently, but there was something odd about it. This man's name had 4 stars, which was a great rarity. Sanguin Bang was unaware of their meaning, but he had encountered something like this somewhere before. If he wasn't mistaken, it was several years ago when he saw the list. It was the first time he had ever seen 4 stars above the name of a blacklisted man. They were over teacher Oh Jonghwa. She seemed to piss Hanwul off a lot. But Sangin was sure Hanwul had done nothing to the shogun. Or perhaps he doesn't know something after all, for that was often the case. Techman is done fighting. Looks like they've hired bodyguards. They also drove without a license in front of a cop. It was too much. He turned to Shogun, helping him free himself from the rope. But instead of thanking him, the Shogun snorted unhappily for some reason. He realized that the man in front of him was a police officer, and therefore useless. He asked him who he was and how he knew his name, but Techman didn't say a word. He was among those police officers who were literally a couple seconds short. That afternoon, people began to converge, horrified to notice the woman's body, which was badly mutilated. He was working as an officer in Seoul at the time, and while chasing one of their white leads, he came across him, Shogun Park. He still remembered the way that kid had looked at him then. Holding his bloody belly, he wasn't just showing hatred, it was something more. Now, how do you explain to Shogun that he was the policeman back then? He started at what Gamin had told him, but the Shogun was unwilling to listen to anything. He walked out the door and was about to leave, and Tachman was getting a little pissed off about it. Then the Shogun looked at him with a look that made it clear he didn't want to talk to him. Looks like he still hasn't shipped after surviving the injury. After surviving that incident, he must have vowed never to get involved with the police. Shogun had already dialed dongua. He briefly recounted what had happened. Afterward, he hurried home where his father was already waiting for him. He asked why his son had that look, but he said it didn't matter. He said there was information that would definitely interest him. Finally, Gamin sat and studied. He could hardly even believe it himself. He picked up his phone to check his messages, but found something interesting. He opened correspondence with a new acquaintance, an investigator, who wrote that Shogun had successfully returned yesterday. And then he went into the chat rooms and saw that he was a member of the Yusun study group. Immediately, the guys joined in, starting a debate by discussing Lee Chong's punctuality. Toth stood and reminisced about the time he had given Auntie running shoes on his birthday. He still couldn't believe that Auntie had said such a thing to him, and perhaps even wanted to kill him and Ga Ming. But suddenly an invitation to the study group chat room came to him as well, and he logged in there. Taiman sat in his office studying the correspondence with Ga Min with curiosity. Not just him, they were all interesting in their own way, and what united them was their love of learning. If only Shogun could get close to them, that was what he was thinking about. Those moments when you are both friends and rivals are very important in life. That's only possible at school, he smiled, closing his phone. They all wanted the same thing, to do well in school and not get involved in crime. Someone had notified him that Chung Han was dead. Now we'd have to stop recruiting students for a while. Hanwul sat there, speaking thoughtfully about Ga Ming. He said that the guy wasn't the type to joke around with. If this continues, this school could really change for the better, which was extremely nasty. Of course, he couldn't let that happen and had already added the new name to his list. A week ago, their group was formed. All 5 men were included. And they all made the decision to study for 3 hours every day. They did try, but they clearly lacked order in their organization. Even though Ga Min had dreamed of it, in terms of realization, it turned out to be much more complicated. But that's exactly what it took, a teacher to establish their discipline. Ga Min was just walking to school when a familiar voice called out to him. Kim Kyujin is up to his old tricks again. Each time he abuses his power from the student council. He openly bullied Gamin, constantly coming up with new ways. For example, right now he was picking on the fact that Ga Min was walking without a jacket, and now he couldn't let him into the school. The reasons were terribly far-fetched, but Ga Ming couldn't help it. That's when she came to the rescue, saying that school rules don't specify not wearing a jacket on a student. Miss Han Kyung had already recovered and approached the guys with Kyujin to better hurry up and study. She said since he was such a stickler for rules, why did he break them himself? Kyujin didn't like those words at all, but there was nothing he could do about it either. His friend said, however, that they had Tom Kench with them, which meant they might not have listened to this teacher after all. But for some reason, Kyujin decided they would be better off listening to her this time. They walked down the hallway and Ga Min thanked her, asking her how she was feeling. She said she was fine, like those super teachers from the comic books. Gamin didn't really laugh at her joke, and he told her to just be careful. The girl was a little shy hearing him say that, but she felt good about it. Then she gave him a light flick on the forehead, telling him he was the one who had to be careful. Then she put her hand on his head, like a mother praising her child. Was just what she said, praising him. She looked him straight in the eye. She said he should study hard from now on, and then asked if he wanted to go to the bookstore this weekend. In the end, 5 people did make it, and now the director didn't have to deny them activities. He told Ms. Han Kyung to go to the accounting department to get funding. He also asked Hyun-woo, and she said she honored his request and declined all interviews. She asked him to look at the last page of the document. Upon seeing what was written on it, indignation enveloped the principal. He said it was unthinkable, and he forbids it at all costs. Lee Chong was walking by when he heard that noise from the teacher's lounge. He saw the principal yelling at the very teacher from the rumors. She's already been dubbed Han Kyung's divine teacher. He suddenly realized how cool she was and couldn't help but admire her. When he saw her heading for the exit, he hurried away from the door. She came out and straight up let off steam. It was obvious something was annoying her. She slammed the doors behind her, and the principal thought she was kind of weird. After all, in the document she had given, on the last page, was a request for Fai Han-wool's exclusion. She's only a temporary teacher, so why was she so curious? He didn't want to think she was playing on his feelings, thinking he wouldn't fire her. He remembered how another teacher had once asked him the same thing. Either it's Ms. Jonghwa who's possessed her, or they're just one and the same. And Han Kyung was already standing under the administration door, knowing that this man would be able to help her. Ga Ming walked into the classroom wearing a work suit, and he also smelled like silicone lubricant. At that moment, everyone turned around first, and then continued to go about their business. Ga Ming realized that he was treated with contempt in class, but he couldn't do anything about it. He shared his worries with Se-hyun, asking if there was anything he should do. But Se-hyun calmed him down and said that it was just the opposite, because Ga-min was the one who had rank 1 among the first years. And so they're just being cautious, watching him. But Ga-ming didn't need this kind of fame. He had a bad feeling again. But really, in the eyes of the others, he seemed like a pretty good guy. Hyun-woo was in rehab, so school got pretty bleak for Hongjae. Se-hyun reminded Gamin that they had final exams coming up. Suddenly, Hongjae, who had decided to go to the hall, fell to the floor at the entrance of the office. The man she could rely on was sitting right in front of her. Plus, he also had a personal conflict with the school principal. The candidate for the next school principal is Jong Ja-hul. He said, however, that one stare and fiery speech were not enough to constitute a commission. He judged only by deeds and not by conscience, asking if the former were available on Hanwol. So far, he had yet to give himself away directly. He was very cunning. Jechul asked if they had indeed formed a study group. The guy who had knocked Hongjae down was now stomping on him, saying that Hyun-woo had borrowed money from him and was now bailing. Gamin saw this and couldn't stir, but Se-hung held him back with all his might. Gamin asked who he was, to which Se-hyun replied that he was the shittiest thug in school. However, they saw this already by his cruelty to Hunjae alone. His name was Kang Ho-min, and he was new, for he had only recently been transferred. However, it was also surprising that the guy had 4 technical certifications. The director candidate told her the condition under which he was willing to convene a disciplinary committee. The leader of their study group had to take first place among the whole school. Gaming put his hand on Ho-min's shoulder, and the latter looked at him in confusion. But then they heard a woman's voice telling them to stop immediately. Kang Ho-min looked at Gamin curiously and said that he had heard about his fights. He joked about it, saying that he, in turn, is a grade 1. He said he was a simple student who studied hard. But Gamin told him to take it back, because before that, he had mentioned Ji-woo, calling her a whore. But Kang Ho-min asked him in return what would happen if he didn't take back his words. He said since she dated Kyujin for money, that makes her a whore. Then he started talking about her and her brother's lack of family, and Gamin didn't hold back. Ho-min saw his entire life in front of his eyes for a moment, to the point that a powerful blow flew. However, for some reason, at the last second, Gaming stopped. The other students watched with interest. If only Kang Homan didn't have the principal's support. He admitted that it took him by surprise. He was even scared. But every action carries a responsibility that you should always be prepared for. The principal walked into their classroom and immediately saw Kang Homan. He told him that they were already waiting for him. After that, they both left, and Gamin remained standing beside Sehyun. Hanjae was still squirming in pain, and the guys realized that the bastard wanted to provoke them with this. He provoked Gamin, knowing that the principal himself would come. But that wasn't what Gamin was thinking about. He asked Sehyun how soon their exams were. Finally, Ms. Han Kyung walked in, holding some materials in her hands as usual. The entire study group was finally assembled. All that was left was to move on to the robot. Ji Woo was bantering with Gamin, and when Han Kyung asked, it turns out he lost the argument to her. They argued over who could do the exercises better, and Gamin came in last. He suddenly pounded his hands on the table with words about the first rank, but no one understood. Then he explained that no matter how, he had to become the best among the school for the final exam. Han Kyung looked at him in surprise, for he was talking about first place. She remembered the words of the principal in the principal's candidacy and realized that this was their chance. After all, she hasn't said anything yet, and Gamin is already so enthusiastic. But she suddenly said he shouldn't study under the influence of emotion. She pulled out a marker, saying they needed to get to know each other first. So, based on the test taken in February, she was going to spell out their overall scores on the board. Ji Woo said it's too awkward, but Han Kyung said that's how they get to know the others better. Looking at the results of his comrades, Gamin was kindly envious. Lee Ji-woo, total score 42, average 18, ranked 180 out of 220. Lee Jong, total score 94, average 32, ranked 132 out of 220. Choi Haiwan, total score 54, average 19, ranked 162 out of 220. Gamin was next, but Han Kyung hesitated a bit before continuing. Yoon Gamin, total score 25, average 8, ranked 217 out of 220. Hearing his results, he snickered, and Sehyun put a hand on his shoulder. And last Kim Sae-hyun, total score 250, average 83, ranked 3 out of 220. Reading Sehyun's results, Han Kyung was surprised herself. The others, too, seemed at a loss for words when they heard about the 250 total balls. Sehyun got a little embarrassed when everyone started complimenting him. Hyun looked at him in a peculiar way. In her eyes, he was utterly amazing. Han Kyung, meanwhile, scribbled the results on the board, saying that everyone but Sehyun was somewhere down the line. But Gamin stood up, saying that there was still more to come if they studied hard. However, Han Kyung said that there are no miracles when it comes to scoring points. And even if it is memorized to death, good results cannot be achieved in such a short time. Of course, this is applicable to all normal schools, but grading at Uisan High School is completely different. That's why they have to believe in themselves and in their comrades. Only then they can do it. When the gathering was over, the guys went about their business, and Han Kyung was left alone. She had only pointed them in the right direction by giving them last year's answer sheet, but now it was up to them. Besides Gamin, there was another guy with the most likely chance of becoming a top student. It was Sehyun. With his grades, he could very well finish the year ranked in the top one. Lee Jong didn't understand why he didn't go to public school. But Gamin remembered how the latter had told him something strange about his parents, who didn't like his studies. He suddenly looked seriously at Se-hyun, who had already managed to go home, and decided he had to help his friend. After all, there was definitely a problem with something here that was preventing him from using his knowledge to the max. After saying goodbye to Ji-woo and Chan, he followed Se-hyun. Se-hyun saw the message from his father. As always, he didn't think about what Se-hyun himself wanted. What was the point of ranking if he was forced to go to the construction site every day? When he got to his father's office, he risked bragging about his place in the school rankings. He said he could enroll if he kept going, but his father wouldn't listen to him anymore, tossing the bottle in his direction. He asked who was going to pay for his university tuition if they were already in so much debt. And yet other parents worry that their children can't get in, so why was he born into this family? He was walking past an alleyway when suddenly someone called out to him. It was Kang Homan, who was sitting on one guy who strongly resembled Gamin. Se-hyun panicked, for he didn't know what he should do in such a situation. And then, as if for bad luck, Hyvon appeared, who, seeing him, came closer. She asked if he wanted to walk home together, since they were all exactly one way. But Se-hyun realized that now was not the best moment to walk together. Grinning evilly, he ordered his friends to take them both. Gamin, meanwhile, kept wondering which way Se-hyun had gone, since he was unfamiliar with the neighborhood. Kang Ho-min was resentful because of what they said in class today about him having the principal's support. Gamin started to run. He suddenly realized that Se-hyun might be in the bidet. Ho-min put out his hand, preparing to give another flick to Se-hyun. This time his nose was bleeding. It was the 6th flick in the count. He was being held without giving him a chance to resist, so Ho-min enjoyed the process. He laughed, saying his oh-so-weak nose set a record by bleeding after only 6 times. Hyvon couldn't just stand there and watch it, but she couldn't do anything about it either. The girl who was holding her yanked her hair, telling her she was going to get it too. After all, she's the goat who punched Mihi and has been hanging around with judoka Ji-woo forever. Seeing Hyun's hair being tugged, Se-hyun became furious. Then Haiwon wasn't afraid to strike because of the move, but that one never materialized. He couldn't stand to see his girlfriend humiliated either. A week ago, after the white-lead incident, it was time to leave that place. Ga-min, Lee Jong, and Ji-woo split off to the sides, while Se-hyun and Hee-won were to walk in the same direction. As she left, Ji-woo told the pervert not to do anything stupid, referring to Se-hyun, but Haiwon explained that it was her kind of joke. They walked together and soon came directly to Hee-won's house. She said that she shouldn't have seen her off for so long, and that next time she would also see Se-hyun off. And then she suddenly thanked him for everything he'd done, and he stood there with his mouth open in surprise. She explained that he went with her to the police station and helped her talk to the investigator. Thanks to him, she didn't stutter there, though there was a chance of that, because the sight is creepy. But Se-hyun joked back, saying that the real hero in this story is, of course, Ga-min. And he, Se-hyun, would be better suited for a minor role. But Haiwon said she didn't agree with that. She thought he was belittling himself too much that way. She said she heard from Ji-woo how he threw a computer off the roof. Not everyone could do that. She had already gone inside, saying that of course Ga-min and Ji-woo are amazing. But to her, he, Se-hyun, is as good as the heroes he himself spoke of. Remembering those words of hers, he thought that a good girl like her. I finally talked to him today and this happened. Ho-min watched him with interest, thinking that something was about to start. He ordered Haiwon to be brought here and then told her that she was only a weak slave. The guy who was holding Se-hyun said the same thing right in his ear. The final straw was when Ho-min put his arm around Hee-won, saying that he was going to have fun with her now. He did it right in front of Se-hyun, and the latter realized he had to do something about it. Hyvon had called him amazing, so he couldn't make her take it back. He would no longer allow himself to be treated like a fool. With that thought, he bit the guy from behind. Although Ho-min had expected something like this, he was still surprised that he managed to get out. The guy who was holding him fell to the ground, grabbing his arm. Se-hyun threw himself at Ho-min, telling him to get his rake away from Haiwon. Unfortunately, he didn't even have time to punch before he got kicked in the face. Ho-min asked, mocking him, what would happen if he refused. Hee-won screamed in horror when she saw Se-hyun on the ground with drops of blood. But he didn't lose consciousness, except that it didn't get any easier. Ho-min once again repeated to him that he was only a weak slave of Ga-min, nothing more. The guy he bit was already on his feet, offering to finish the creep off. Se-hyun lay on the ground and thought that he would have defeated them all without much effort if he were Gamin. Meanwhile, Ho-min turned around to go somewhere, taking Hyvon with him. Se-hyun tried to stand up, but it came out very hard and not the first time. Seeing that he did get up, Ho-min pounced on him, saying that he was about to show him how to properly knock him out with a single punch. He punched Se-hyun in the ribcage, and he felt a rush of nausea. Finished with him, he turned back to Hee-won, telling the others to disperse as well. Suddenly someone said 3 words from the famous game of rock, paper, scissors. It was Ga-min, and a pair of scissors fell out of his hand, which he held up to Ho-min's outstretched hand. He said he won because scissors cut paper according to the general rules. Homan didn't expect this, and certainly didn't expect to see Ga-ming reaching up to touch his forehead. Seeing his friend, Se-hyun was also surprised, for he thought he had left with the others. Ga-min put his finger on Homan's forehead, preparing to do a flick, and then he made one, the one that was so strong that the guy flew into the wall. Everyone else looked at this scene with astonishment, but Ga-ming was not confused by anything. He asked how Homan felt about his 1-inch flick, and then he said he just wanted to play for a while and came up to him again. Both the loser and the winner would say it's just a game. Se-hyun guessed his plan. After all, playing and fighting are different things. But this was something Homan didn't realize, saying that Gamin must be anxious to get out of school. He pounced at him, swinging his fist, but Ga-ming had expected this. With the words paper, he grabbed his punch with his open hand. Now it turned out that the paper had covered the stone, which meant Ga-ming had won again. He brought his hands together again, preparing a flick, and his face was full of determination. Now he was going to find out which one of them was in fact the weak slave. At the same time, Ji-woo cried out happily as Lee Chong killed another one. They decided to go to a computer club together and play some shooting games. They only need to kill one player to emerge victorious. They each took aim for the final attack, keeping a close eye on their opponent. They followed that up with a final attack, both sending their opponents to knockout. Haman's head hit the wall painfully, but that wasn't even the worst of it. He realized that all this time he had been watched by the students, in front of whom he seemed strong. And now they stood and laughed with him, realizing that there were others like Ga-ming. He announced the score, which was already 2-0 in his favor, and he wanted to play to 10. Suddenly, he swung into the open, saying Homan lost if he doesn't participate. He started to approach him again, and Homan thought the guy had lost his mind. The apprentice, who had been in cahoots with him a few minutes ago, was now saying that he would pay for everything. Any rumors concerning him would quickly leak out. It's only a matter of time before they start spreading them. Ga-ming told him that if he didn't participate, he lost. But suddenly, Haiwan noticed something strange and rushed to warn Ga-min. A guy and a girl wanted to get video of the fight by pointing a camera at them. Ga-min quickly realized how this could end up for him and threw Homan. He bounced off the ground and ran up the wall like a Spider-Man. Bouncing off the wall, he knocked the phone out of the girl's hands, saying he was nervous in front of the camera. The phone fell to the ground, and the girl didn't even realize at once what had happened. From shock and fright, she had also fallen down, and now they were looking at Ga-ming angrily together. The guy decided not to despair and took out his phone as well, pointing the camera at Ga-ming. But he knocked it out of the guy's hands before he could start recording. The phone also fell to the ground and its screen cracked. The guy was angry, saying Ga-min had no right to do that. But the guy put his hands on his shoulders, saying he was just nervous in front of the camera lens. The boy, feeling his grip, realized the man was strong. He remembered that the first rank was once behind Kang Tae-hong, but now it had gone to Yoon Ga-min. As if to confirm his thoughts, Ga-ming clenched his shoulder. But he could not continue, for someone called out to him. It was Hee-won, who had been abandoned by Homan and was now running away. There was only one thought in his mind: get out as fast as possible. He was angry at Ga-min, promising himself that he would take revenge on him. Ga-min meanwhile approached those who were left, saying that they too still had 7 rounds left. But the guys said they weren't teammates with Homan and quickly ran away. Ga-min asked Se-hyun and Hee-won if they were okay. But from Se-hyun's reaction, he realized that the guy was dissatisfied with something. He told Haiwan that he would go first, and it was obvious that his mood was depressed. He apologized, lowered his head, and walked in the direction of the house. But at home, a less pleasant situation awaited him. His father hit him, saying he was crazy to say such things. He told him to go to the construction site, but for some reason, he wasn't there. He yelled at him, telling him that he didn't appreciate at all the robot his father had made for him. He accused him of not wanting to work and earn money, instead wanting to learn. Se-hyun clenched his fists. He had wanted to tell his father the whole truth for a long time. But his father took the gesture differently and swung around to hit him. But Se-hyun caught his hand, making it clear that he wasn't going to take it anymore. He said he never said he wouldn't work and make money. It's just that he'll do it after he graduates and goes to university. He brushed his father's hand away, saying that he was the one who never appreciated how hard Se-hyun worked. His father replied to him that he was just an ungrateful son who didn't want to work. Se-hyun refused to answer anything to such a thing, for it was already very clear. He said that if his father thought him an ungrateful son, let him live on his own. As he closed the door behind him, he had time to hear the man say that he couldn't survive outside the house. Unfortunately, it was true. He couldn't hold back any longer, and tears appeared in his eyes. Suddenly, he saw Gamin, who had also come to his house. He said he never thought Se-hyun would run away from home. He said it wasn't actually good, but Se-hyun didn't care much for his opinion. As he realized, the man had followed him because he was worried. He said he learned his family circumstances from Homin. It didn't matter, life or death, he would never be able to understand it. He said he didn't run away from home, he just went out to clear his head. But Gamin suddenly told him that he could go to him if he wanted to, and Se-hyun stopped, in surprise at having to rephrase what he had said. Gamin said she understood him why he didn't want to go back. He added that he thinks he and he are pretty similar, actually. But Se-hyun still didn't understand what the man was talking about and told him that. Gamin replied, since he was interested, it was worth going to him and figuring it out for yourself. He said to hurry as he only had 40 minutes left. Meanwhile, some guy was looking at his phone, reading messages from someone important. It turned out to be a mission he was just about able to accomplish at the present time. The Homin house was in complete turmoil, but for good reason. His sister came in to see him, asking if he was all right, for he was screaming in the middle of the night. He gave her an angry look, telling her to get lost. His sister didn't test him and left right away. Homin sat and studied. He had to maintain his reputation of being the #1 in academic performance. But he was so angry with Gamin that he dialed some number with a strange name. The guy who picked up the phone asked why the guy had called him. Homin said he would like to utilize their services by placing an order. The guy on the other end of the wire understood everything, saying that they would take care of everything. About Homin should only pay. After getting an assurance that he would pay, the guy said he would send someone over right away. At this moment, Han Wol-fi walked in on him. They knew each other well because of their parents. However, he said Min-hwan bolted from the room because it annoyed him. But the man was in no hurry to do so, saying that he had just received an order for Yoon Ga-min. Upon hearing Ga-ming's name, Han Wol immediately changed his attitude. Now he said that he and he were quite similar, but such words startled Min-hwan. Han Wol said that he too was curious how strong this auntie was. Auntie read the message from Min-hwan and began the task. That was the reason why he was chosen for the role. Gamin wanted to take Se-hyun's hand, but he didn't let him, saying he didn't want to go. Ga-ming didn't understand why he was being stubborn. After all, an invitation to visit should make one happy. Se-hyun said it was too late, they had missed the last bus. Then Gamin offered to take a cab, but Se-hyun said he was crazy if he was willing to fork out that kind of money. However, the man spoke in complete earnest, saying he was willing to pay. Se-hyun remembered his father's words about how hard it would be for him to earn money, so he said that kind of thing he never did. They originally lived in different worlds, so Ga-ming would never be able to understand him. With those words, he turned around to leave, leaving Ga-ming confused. He said he couldn't accept his help every time. But Ga-min shouted that of course he was doing it because they were friends. But the reason for Se-hyun's displeasure was something else. He said he was grateful for all his help. Except, he was always the loser. Whether at school or at home, there was no way he could win on his own. Lastly, he told him to just consider that he was overreacting. Ga-ming didn't understand his friend, but was distracted by the messages. It was from his mom. She warned him he had 25 minutes left. This was bad, for he remembered how she had threatened to transfer him if he didn't show up on time. But was it right to leave Se-hyun like that? He wasn't sure about it, so he had to make a hard choice. Se-hyun was walking and listening to the music. He was surprised that it was already 10. School opened at 7, which meant we had to hang around for another 8 hours. The subway was creepy to him. And he couldn't go to an internet cafe unless it was a per diem cafe. Then he thought about just going home, but the image of his father laughing immediately popped into his mind. He dismissed the thought, for if he did so, it would only prove his father's fame of being a lazy son. He'll show him he can keep his word. Suddenly he saw some oddly dressed guys. They must have been bandits. He heard one of them mention Gaming's name, and now the situation was taking a terrifying turn. After all, if that's the case, they failed Hanwul's assignment. So their goal was to get his address and break into his house. He couldn't believe it. He had to tell Gamin that they were watching him and had already started dialing a number. Just as suddenly, one of the bandits noticed him, but Se-hyun didn't see that one. The bandit saw that he was looking for Gamin's number and told Anti that it seemed to be okay now. He asked Se-hyun if he was Gamin's friend, and if so, he must surely know his address. When he saw that he had been spotted, he immediately rushed to run, screaming at the top of his voice. Anti jumped out after him, telling his guys to catch him. He licked his lips fearfully, saying that the main thing was desire, and a way would be found. Se-hyun ran as fast as he could, but it was already clear that the guys were faster than him. Fortunately, he had a good sense of the city, so he managed to turn down an alley. As expected, he was not seen. The bandits swept by him, but he remained safe. He hid behind a garbage can. Of course, the hiding place wasn't the best, but it was the first thing he saw. He didn't even realize what exactly he had done to them that they were now after him. He should have gone along with Gaming. He shouldn't have been stubborn. But suddenly, he heard a voice from behind him. Dodging with horror, he saw a large-looking bandit. The one said he only wanted to ask him for Yoon Gamin's address and then let him go. But now, he's going to beat him up first. Se-hyun didn't believe his words. He didn't want to be beaten, but he couldn't give away his friend's address either. Remembering that so much had happened to him today, he was angry at his own life. Always all he had was defeat. He couldn't fight it anymore. Suddenly, the phone in his pocket vibrated and he felt it. The bandit took his sad look differently, thinking the man wanted to fight him. That made him laugh and he pounced on him, asking if he was sure he'd pull a guy like that. Swinging, he hit him, but Se-hyun ducked at the last moment and his hand missed him. This amused the bandit, for the boy, it turned out, could do something too. But what was his surprise when he realized the guy hadn't even tried to duck, only bent over to get a better read on something on his phone. Gaming's voice suddenly came from the phone, commanding him to put it in his pocket and stand. Se-hyun was surprised, asking how the man could see him if he went home. But Gamin replied that he didn't go, and right now he actually saw him. He stood on the roof, saying he was looking at Se-hyun. He continued to command, telling him to clench his fist and put his right foot forward. He asked him if he didn't want to win for the first time in his life. He also told the man not to worry because he wouldn't save him this time. But if he follows his words and instructions, he can win and prove to himself and his father that he can take care of himself. The cab driver wanted to swipe his card to pay, but Gamin said he changed his mind about the ride, asking the man to return it. The uncle did not understand his request, for they had already traveled halfway. But Gaming told him he could keep the money and reached for the car door. It was 10 p.m. Eventually, he returned to the place where Se-hyun had left him. And now, he stood thinking about his friend, wondering if anything bad had happened to him. The expression on his face with which he left him said that Gaming had indeed hurt him in some way. In fact, the feeling was so familiar to him himself. When he was desperately trying to study but his results weren't improving, he was losing too. Without support, it will be hard for any person, no matter how strong they may seem. He should try to get that message to his mom, and it didn't matter how. Suddenly, he saw Se-hyun and then a whole gang of criminals running after him. Seeing that frightened face, he realized that his friend was in danger. The bandits split into two groups, and one of them went in Se-hyun's direction. Gaming was glad he had returned after all. After all, he was right. His friend really needed help. Except that at the thought of helping him, he remembered his words, how the man had said he was forever helping him. So this time, he decided to give him a chance to prove himself. Bandit asked if this was his way of showing that he was not a student of Juisun for nothing. Se-hyun didn't respond with words, but showed his fist as Gamin asked him to do. Now he was determined to fight back. The bandit realized it too, but was sure he couldn't handle him. In other words, he was a complete bottom, but Se-hyun didn't pay attention to his words. Gamin, he suddenly called him to fight on his own, only giving him hints. He was the one who had told him to get down then, which Se-hyun did. He even said that he could win if he followed his words. So they started. The bandit didn't seem to have a chance anymore. Both in physique and experience, Se-hyun was losing, it was obvious. But precisely because the opponent knew it too, he was relaxed, not even thinking that he might lose. Gamin said to tightly clench his right fist and visualize a wall to his left, and then needed to hit her as hard as Se-hyun could. He took his advice, doing exactly as Gamin said. The wall, of course, turned out to be a thug, and Se-hyun had just thrown his first punch at him. However, the bandit didn't seem to feel him at all. He was more surprised that the guy hit at all. He lunged at him, but Gamin told Se-hyun to move to the left just in time. He did so, and after a moment he dodged the attack again. It also came out that the bandit tripped over his foot, which he had already gotten to the point of putting out himself. He was shocked to see such a big guy slammed to the ground by his footstool. Se-hyun realized that Gamin hadn't even told him to kick or punch, but even with that, he was able to win. Meanwhile, Gamin saw a message from his mom, who was already starting to get angry that he wasn't home. But Gamin hadn't responded to her message yet, turning to Se-hyun to say a few words to the bandit. Se-hyun didn't realize it. He didn't think it was a good idea. But he listened and told that guy that he didn't think the guy would turn out to be so weak. He asked him if that was all he was capable of. The bandit, as expected, boiled with anger, for he too did not think that he would be dealt with so easily. He shouted at the top of his voice so that one of his partners could hear him yell. He asked if he had caught the guy, but there was nothing to answer. He looked at Se-hyun with surprise, wondering when the man had gotten over his fear. He kept dodging his blows time after time, and it made him very angry. He didn't understand why he couldn't hit that insolent boy. It was impossible for the bandit to understand, for he had no idea about Gamin. But suddenly, he had Se-hyun cornered. There was a car behind him, which meant there was nowhere else to retreat to. It hit where his head had been a second ago, but Se-hyun managed to crouch down. Gamin said that now was the perfect moment to attack, and Se-hyun simply couldn't miss such a chance. The bandit, hitting the car and not Se-hyun, screamed in pain, calling the guy all kinds of profanities. But suddenly, he fell silent, watching in surprise as Se-hyun was about to strike right at his face. Gamin thought that he couldn't ask Se-hyun, who had never trained, to get into a normal stance and show fight. He wasn't that strong, so the only way for him to win was to put all his strength into a surprise strike. However, that's what he did right now, bouncing off the ground and headbutting the bandit. After all, you don't have to win in some convoluted way. The important thing now is to get him out of that depressed state of perpetual defeat. And you don't need to score 100 points on special tests at all. Routine support is all that, from time to time, each of us needs. The bandit didn't move, and Se-hyun was able to get out of that creepy back alley with no problem. They were standing together outside Gamin's house, and he was nervous because he was about to meet his mother, who had a lot of explaining to do. He told Se-hyun that he was great at fighting and asked how it felt to beat someone. Se-hyun had already started to describe it somehow, but he suddenly interrupted and said it wasn't important. Instead, he said that Gamin had already said that they looked alike, and he, Se-hyun, had an assumption about his father. But before Gamin could answer anything, they saw some woman looking at them. Gamin recognized her as his mother in surprise, who was now looking at him with a serious look. He was a little confused and started talking about the reason he was so late, and Se-hyun greeted her. He said he was Gamin's classmate, except that the woman noticed the blood on his sleeve and wasn't too happy about it. She walked over to her son and slapped him without further ado. She asked him if he thought she divorced his father to see him like this, and Se-hyun looked at them in surprise. She said she didn't want to hear any more about this study group or whatever it was. She'd had enough. She continued by telling Gamin to get ready to transfer to another school because she wouldn't stand for it anymore. Auntie was glad that he'd been lucky enough to track down Gamin after all, and the hours of prowling around Songdo hadn't been in vain. He and another guy right now were watching Gamin and his mother and Sai-hyun walk into the front door. He said, "Let that blonde guy get beat up," but the guy standing with him did a good job. He wasn't in the fight, but he followed them. Auntie crunched his fists in anticipation. He noticed that it felt as if Gamin had a rich family judging from the high-rise. He said he had already seen Hanwul recognize the legendary hymn when suddenly someone pointed a beam of light at them and asked what he had just said. It was a man who overheard them talking about how they were going to sneak into someone else's house and destroy everything. When the boys asked in consternation who he was, the man replied that he was the one who stood guard over this house, Mr. Security Guard. Gamin had a light on in his room because no one was going to sleep, but that was understandable given the circumstances he was in. He was sitting together with Se-hyun on the bed. After all, you couldn't just kick your friend outside, so Mom didn't protest. But his mood was depressed. Se-hyun noticed it, asking if he was okay. He said he shouldn't have come here and that this situation was even more embarrassing than his argument with his father. Then she said she had told him not to get into any trouble and he had disobeyed her again. Se-hyun then realized that she meant the blood on his sleeve and hurried to help Gamin. Meanwhile, his mom asked what he did after school, and Gamin awkwardly said that he played slapstick with a top student. Seeing that the situation was taking a dangerous turn, Se-hyun intervened, saying that she apparently didn't understand. They weren't doing anything wrong. He decided to add that, in fact, he was the third best in school, for he thought mothers usually favored the smart kids. But how surprised he was when Gamin's mother gave him a strange look, asking, so what if he was the third? He didn't even think of what to reply and just stood silently beside Gamin, wondering from her. She said she didn't care about school rankings, and then noticed that he seemed to be in trouble and let him stay the night. Gamin's mother, she was something else. Never in his life had he met people like this before. He told Gamin that he turned out to have a pretty good house, saying that it was completely different. He also really liked the elevator and honestly admitted that he was jealous, but Gamin interrupted his compliments. He suddenly apologized, saying that he had only inconvenienced him by dragging him here, and added that he and the study group would definitely succeed. Se-hyun asked what he meant by saying that his mom couldn't have been serious back then. However, Gamin didn't think so. He said it does translate, because if she said that, then that's what she meant. If his mother said to prepare, then she would indeed do it, even though transferring to another school is not an easy thing. Gamin started telling his friend about all the times in his life when his mom told him to get ready for something, and it always happened. And then he said it was the same in his father's case, and his expression changed to a sad one. Then she said that Mom and Dad were going to get a divorce and his heart had to be ready for it. She continued, telling him not to worry even if he didn't get into university, because she could provide him with a good life on her own. Just as long as he grew up to be a good man, just like he was now, then everything else would be taken care of, she promised. She hugged him and told him that she didn't care if he wasn't very smart in school. She wasn't the only one. She asked if she was wrong, and for some reason she started crying. Gamin tells Se-hyun that his mom would rather raise him to be a good person, who doesn't cause trouble or get into trouble. For her to see him like this would be better than someone who was going to university and qualifying for professional schools. But Se-hyun didn't understand why Gamin had decided to come back for him then, because he should have realized that he wouldn't arrive on time in such a case. Gamin's mom came into the room. She was holding some paper and told them to keep quiet and go to bed. She handed a piece of paper to Gamin, saying that it was a sheet of suitable schools for transfer, and he should just pick the one he wanted. That was the end of the conversation. They turned off the light and went to bed, for tomorrow was going to be a difficult day for both of them. But even though the lights were off, the guys couldn't sleep. Se-hyun asked Gamin why he didn't tell him that Ms. Han Kyung was his tutor. Gamin asked if it was such a big deal, to which Se-hyun replied that it was cool, but Gamin hadn't even told his mom that she was their new class teacher. Se-hyun lay back, reflecting on his friend's life. They really were quite similar, especially now that they were both out of favor. He suddenly got up from the bed and asked directly what now seemed strange to him. He asked why Gamin was so obsessed with studying. After all, seriously, not every mother would say that school performance means nothing to her, and unlike him, Gamin had no money problems. He voiced a guess, asking if he wasn't dreaming of something, because everyone should have it. Gamin actually thought about it, but he didn't dare to answer Se-hyun, telling him to just sleep already. But Se-hyun was burning with curiosity. He remained sitting on the bed as suddenly Gamin started to say something. He remembered moments from his life when his parents were still together, but for some reason the one he remembered most was the fighting. He was just a child then, but he felt it was happening because of him, though he didn't fully understand. To Se-hyun, he told him it was just his fault, absolutely. He asked, "It sucks when there is a lack of support, doesn't it?" It made the friend remember his situation as well. His father and his words about Se-hyun being out of his mind with his delusions about going to university appeared in front of him again. Then he remembered how Gamin had said those very words, about how they were alike and that he understood him, and suddenly everything became clear to him. Gamin said that unfortunately, he will no longer be able to study with him, but he doesn't regret what he has done either. Se-hyun remembered seeing his task calendar on his desk, with one of the items on it being the creation of a study group, and how excited he was about it. Then he even wrote encouraging phrases in place of other points, and the last one not checked was, "Get a higher score." Se-hyun thought that he wouldn't want to break up with his friend so easily, but the next day, school routine replaced those thoughts. Homan heard that there were some rumors going around the school. The students were all chatting about someone who had suddenly done something, and it interested him. Se-hyun stood in front of the classroom, leaning against the window. He mentally calmed himself before entering. After all, it was proving to be quite difficult to do so. They stood in front of the principal's office, trying to get a glimpse of what was going on inside, but the view was obstructed by the blinds, so Se-hyun thought to peek in there for a moment. He suddenly wondered, thinking hopefully, if the meeting was going really well, but Ms. Han Kyung still hadn't shown up. The girls also found out about Gamin's transfer. Heewon was excited about the news, and Ji-woo said that it wouldn't have happened if they hadn't gone to the internet cafe then. Lee Jong also refused to accept such news. He said that Gamin still has to make him stronger after all, but Se-hyun interrupted them all. He said that the list his mom gave Gamin had only 3 schools to choose from, but the transfer process was too long in the first 2. There was only one Sando Technology School left, and right now is going through the process of getting the principal's approval. Then it will be over. Se-hyun said that's why he took action this morning to do something for his friend and encourage him to stay. Back then, he went to someone and said that Gamin's transfer should not be allowed under any circumstances, because it would cause a lot of problems. He said that if this happens, the school will lose its greatest potential, referring to Gamin. Ji-woo couldn't believe that's what he said to the headmaster, saying that the squishy prick turns out to be a brave man, but suddenly the doorknob turned and they were wary. Gamin and her mother came out of the office, who was not happy, because she couldn't believe that the principal refused to give permission for the transfer. Seeing this, Se-hyun realized that his plan had worked, and although he didn't have high hopes for this conversation, he still managed to convince the headmaster. Now Gamin would be with them again, and it couldn't be happier. Everyone in the study group was insanely happy about it. However, Gamin's mom wasn't in a hurry to give up. She said that it won't work that way, so they are moving to Seoul. The children were shocked to hear this, because moving to another city meant changing schools at any minute and without any authorization. They didn't understand how his mother could do such a thing. Gamin also interrogated her, but she only made it more precise by saying that they were changing the apartment. It seemed that everything was all ready, of course, for Gamin. A moment earlier he had exhaled with relief, but now he was once again tense. A cab was parked at the school gates, and the girl who got out of it was in a big hurry, telling the driver to just charge the card. It was Han Ki-young who had arrived as promised, but she didn't know what she would have to deal with yet. When Gamin first announced that he would go to study at Yuisong High School, His mom was very puzzled by such a statement. He didn't even realize it, thinking his son was joking, but he repeated that he was going to enroll at Uizan. The environment changes a person, so it can also change people. That's why parents have a responsibility to provide a decent environment for their children. Mom was adamant. Gamin knew that if she said to get ready to move, even if it was to another city, then it would happen. To confirm his thoughts, she was already talking to the real estate agent, and the guys were standing there not knowing what to do or how to help here already. At first, they wanted to talk to Gamin's mother, but Sae-hung realized if they interfered, the situation would only get worse. They needed someone trustworthy. Then one person came to his mind who was already on the doorstep of the school. Now all hope was in her. Han Kyung knew it wasn't easy to change Gamin's mom's mind, but still, she remembered the way she talked to her when she hired her as a tutor. Uison High School was indeed a place from which many came out as real criminals. Gamin still decided to ask his mom again if they were really moving, but she clearly wasn't joking and confirmed it. Gamin tried to make his arguments, saying that he had done nothing wrong and he had only succeeded in getting the study group together. But the mother didn't change her mind. She said it wasn't even that. Having only been here for a little while, she'd already seen 3 fights. Plus, there was the stench of cigarette smoke everywhere, and not one teacher had a problem with that. Gamin tried to object, saying that the school is usually not like this. It's only today, and so there are many good students here. But she told him not to talk nonsense, and as if for evil, at that moment a chair flew out of one of the classroom windows, shattering the glass and nearly hitting her. He fell to the floor and glass shattered all over the place. It was a terrible conviction to stay in that school. Gamin rushed over to his mom, worrying if she had hurt herself, but she just stood still. He asked if she was okay, but she didn't answer and then said something in a detached voice. She said that this place is no longer a school. It's been impossible to study here for a long time, even though there are really good kids. She clenched her teeth, anger, frustration, and resentment sweeping through her at the same time. She said she'd rather they move next week, no, better tomorrow, and then she said she'd leave today altogether, and for Gamin to get things ready. He looked at her, not believing her words. Did his plan have to fall apart like this? Was this really happening to him? He'd never wanted it to, had he? Han Kyung was already climbing the stairs. She suddenly saw someone walk down the hallway. It was Tom Kench, she greeted him, asking if he knew where the headmaster was now. He explained that he had just gotten back from the Department of Education and wanted to talk to him about something. But the custodian cut off that he had no idea. He was once again forced to go break up another fight, asking when he would quit this school. Han Kyung thought the same thing as he suddenly stopped, remembering that he had to tell her something. He asked her what the situation was with the bespectacled boy in her class, that his mother was demanding permission to take him out of school. Han Kyung looked at him in bewilderment, even though she understood what he was saying, but the guys had already found her and were running towards her. They said they had written to her, asking if she hadn't read it, but she explained that she had only seen a glimpse and hadn't really read it. Then Se-hung briefly told her the situation Gamin was in right now, and what could happen to him if nothing was done. On his way out, Minhwan asked if he was sure he wanted to cancel the course. But then he remembered Gamin's transfer himself, and everything became clear to him. Hummin said he heard it clearly himself, so beating a guy who was going to move would cost him. Minhwan replied that he had beaten Homin. Shouldn't he now defend his honor and avenge it? Homin said that his move was enough for him, as he could easily win the class without him, but Minhwan asked with a smile if he was sure. Who would have thought that Yoon Gamin's monster, Yoon Gamin's weak spot, was his mother? She asked him why he wasn't in the car yet, saying she had already talked to the lecturer and he could go home. But Gamin shouted that he didn't want to leave but wanted to continue studying here because he was good at it. He also said that with his grades and performance, he would not be able to get passing grades to get into another school anyway. Mom suddenly got out of the car, asking if he was saying this because of his father, since she had already told him that he didn't have to finish university. Gamin wanted to object, but she didn't let him finish, saying that she was truly sorry. That time, she had only let him because she thought she couldn't change his mind. but that had turned out to be a mistake. She regretted waking up every time she made him breakfast and seeing him off to school like that, which was why she wouldn't repeat her mistake this time. Suddenly tears came to her eyes. She looked at Gamin as someone who wanted to shut her out from the values and principles she had nurtured in him. She told him to get in the car immediately, and he continued to stand there, thinking he had finally found friends here to study with. Also, Miss Han Kyung taught them some special strategies for midterm exams. No, he didn't want to leave, but he hated the thought of seeing his mom cry more, so he got in the car and they drove away. Just at that moment, Miss Han Kyung and the guys came into the parking lot, but they were surprised that no one was already there. She asked how that could have happened, leading him to be obviously late. Se-hyun asked what they should do now. He would definitely be moving to another school now, and he didn't want that, so much he didn't want that. But Han Kyung wasn't going to give up so easily. She knew that she still had a lot more to teach Gamin. The boys were worried too, asking if it was too strict on Mom's part, but they all believed that she, Han Kyung, would definitely think of something. But she said suddenly to everyone that she couldn't, and Se-hyun looked at her puzzled. She said that she actually had no idea how to do it, which really excited the guys. Se-hyun didn't understand why she was saying that and told her so, saying that she should know Gamin's mother after all. But she said that's why she doesn't imagine it, because Gamin's mother isn't the kind of person who would change her mind. The only one who was determined to fight to the end was Ji-woo, she said. There may not be a way, but you can't just give up. She said that their crazy, four-eyed boy kept his hands up despite the grades he received, and wasn't it her, Han Kyung, who taught him that? She added that one should try one's best, and then something will definitely work out, and everyone else supported her. That's right, they could do that. She remembered how she had actually said those words to Ga-ming herself, so she shouldn't backtrack on them herself right now. She looked at the guys. They were all really lucky to have each other. And in this situation, Gamin was the luckiest because he had friends like this. She started handing out errands, for she had an idea, however, they needed to follow Gamin and her mom to do so. For her plan to succeed, each of them had a role to play. It wouldn't be easy, but they would try, just like Gamin had always tried for them. All this time, Homan watched the conversation, hiding behind one of the cars. He didn't expect them to dare to do such a thing. But he didn't believe in the success of the scheme either. It looked like Gamin wanted to take advantage of the school selection. But Homan would never allow events to go according to the script he had written. He dialed a number, and the person on the other end asked if he really wanted to stop them. Homan briefly explained the situation, asking if he could expect this fat toad to disappear, to which he heard a positive reply. Kang Tai-ho put on his motorcyclist's gloves, preparing to get to the task at hand. He said that by doing so, he would finally restore order to Uisan High School, the kind that should be present in a place like this. They were already on their way, intending to act on Han Kyung's plan and hoped that everything would go well. It was true that the young teacher didn't drive often, so everyone except Chan was a little worried about the road. But the car with Gamin was already far ahead, and it seemed difficult to catch up with them. Gamin sat there, already resigned to the fact that this was his last visit to the school. The boys in the study group showed their permission slips to leave the school to Ms. Han Kyung, because she was the one who insisted on them. They got in the car and prestiged their seatbelts, again at the teacher's request, but it was the right thing to do. They noticed that she had a very new and nice car, but she said it was a rental car and that she didn't have the money for her own yet. She asked if they were all ready, and when the guys answered affirmatively, they hit the road, but Se-hyun still asked someone. He asked if she was all right, for she was gripping the steering wheel like she was driving for the first time in her life. But she calmed everyone down by saying that she was just a little nervous because she had never had to drive 4 students at once before. She told them not to worry and that they would definitely find Gamin. They had texted him earlier, but he still hadn't responded. Apparently his phone was on mute. There was only one option left to contact him, because luckily, Hee-won clearly heard the real estate agency Gamin's mom was talking to. They would be able to meet him there, Han Kyung thought. This was the training group that Gamin wanted so much, and she wouldn't let him give up so easily. Despite feeling guilty in front of Gamin's mother, she couldn't allow him to transfer to another school. Gamin was driving with his mom on the Serpentine Road. They were heading to the MANHUA real estate agency. They weren't traveling fast, so he had time to think and rethink his situation. Mom said it would be even better if they moved to another apartment, but Gamin looked at his phone. He was surprised to see so many messages. She went on to say that she would pick a school with a good atmosphere for him and drive him there, and it was also convenient that she worked in Seoul. She suddenly asked him if he really liked this school just because of the study group. Only thing is, what will she give? Because in their days, in order to earn money, a diploma is not so important. A clear example of this was herself. Yes, and she was doubtful whether he would be happy after graduation. But Gamin thought about just wanting to be together with them, his friends that he was finally able to make. Ms. Han Kyung, he had special memories with her because she had known him since middle school. He glanced at his phone, seeing a message from her too, as he suddenly almost dropped it from his hands. He turned around and looked at the road, not believing what he had read. His mom asked what was wrong, but he was clueless himself for now. He only knew what had been written to him and speculated on possible reasons. They texted him to chase him. It was the guys from the study group. It was true, for somewhere along the same road, of course, observing all the rules of the road, they were driving. His friends, who didn't want to break up just like that either, and were going to keep it from happening. Their car had already entered the Serpentine and was approaching inexorably. They were in a hurry, but they drove carefully, for they were trying for a friend, and that was their main goal. The navigator showed that it was less than 15 minutes to their destination. What would happen? Lee Jong asked what would happen if they arrived first. All were thanks to Han Kyung, who turned out to be an excellent driver with good flair. Se-hyun said she should just keep going straight and they wouldn't notice before they got there. He calculated that even so, they would arrive 20 minutes later than Gamin, which meant another route was needed. If they keep this up, they'll make it before Mom decides where to go next, and she'll also meet Miss Han Kyung-yu. The truth was much more important. Se-hyun asked what only way out she was talking about. The rest of the guys inquired as well, saying that they too could help if needed. But Han Kyung said without enthusiasm that there was no plan, but she didn't have time to finish. Suddenly, a group of motorcyclists flew out onto the road and almost hit the car, wildly passing it at that speed. Han Kyung was scared to death for the children and herself, barely holding the steering wheel without losing control. One of the motorcyclists turned out to be Kang Tae-ho, who smirked as he looked at them. Han Kyung managed to press the pedal to the floor, braking and twisting the car. There was a squeak from the wheels, and the car spun in place, leaving a black trail of scuffed tires. Han Kyung told the guys to hold on, and she didn't regret telling them to fasten their seatbelts. The car came to a stop, caught a little on the fence, but otherwise nothing was damaged. Ji-woo and Jong got out of the car, asking what kind of jackass set this up. They soon saw the answer to their question, for before them stood Kang Tae-ho and his charges. Noticing Lee Chong, he said that a nerd was hanging around here as well, and the latter was taken aback. He answered him in the same way, asking him what the ex-primary high school ex-primary Yuisun was doing here. Han Kyung finally got out of the car. She turned to the guy, asking why they had set all this up. But he only apologized and said that unfortunately none of them would ever set foot out of here. They did manage to block the road with their motorcycles, as if to confirm their words. Kang Tae-ho advised them, just stay out of the nonsense, after all it's just someone else's family business. Gamin, meanwhile, continued to gaze at the road. He hoped that his friends would catch up with them, soon as promised. Ji-woo interjected what the creep meant by nonsense, and Jong was already standing there in anticipation of a fight. He called him ex-perverang again, saying that he didn't know what he'd heard since he'd come here. But one could see right away, he wants to get rid of the current first-ranker Yoon Gamin by sending him to another school. He said he was disappointed because shouldn't he have issued a formal challenge if he thinks he's a man? He kept pushing, saying that maybe he was just afraid they would catch up with him and could convince him not to move. Kang Tae-ho became furious. He said that Gamin wasn't human at all, and if he backed out now, he himself wouldn't be able to return to school. Li Zhong added how he once told this guy that he wanted to be strong. He longed to equal those who were superior in this regard, people like him, Kang Taiho. But now, because of his fear of Gamin, he was using dirty methods after all. It was not a problem as long as one was the best in the Yuichun school. Zhong came close to the guy, saying that from now on he should be afraid of him too, because he would surpass Gamin. He looked him straight in the eye and told him that he would be #1 in Incheon by then. As expected, Taiho couldn't stymie such a thing and swung around to hit the insolent man. The funny thing was that he immediately fell down without even ducking, even though his fiery speeches seemed true. Ji-woo said that Tomato was so useless, and all he had was fortitude. But they all jumped to conclusions. He lay there smiling, then lifted his head and looked at Taiho. He said Gamin's punch knocked him out the first time, and did he really think he, Se-hyun, couldn't do that too? He remembered how Gamin had finally agreed to teach him one of his techniques, namely, the Forbidden Uncle technique. Gamin told him to be serious and listen carefully. He gave him a sheet of other techniques and told him he could choose another if he didn't like this one. That was when he made his choice, and now was the time to try the technique out. He ran at Taiho, and the latter looked on in surprise, for he thought the fellow would never get up again. But Li Chong realized that they had to catch up with Gamin, which meant there was no other choice. He jumped up and ran at him, preparing to attack and clenching his fists. He yelled for him and his boys to get the hell out of this road, then he wouldn't get too hard. Han Kyung looked on in horror, and Ji-woo was surprised, saying that Tomato wasn't just strong in spirit. But would he really be able to defeat a bulky guy like Taiho, because it was completely impossible at first sight? He landed the first knee strike to the face, but Taejo managed to block by putting his hands out. He even stepped back a bit, but he didn't fall down, and that was all that Li Chong's technique was able to do. It pissed him off even more now, and Taiho said that now it was his turn to show off. He swung his fist in Li Chong's face again, and the latter thought that this was not what he wanted to accomplish at all. Unlike Taiho, Li Chong didn't block in time and got hit pretty hard right in the face. He also did not move away, but fell to the pavement, once again hitting his head painfully. Taeho told him that his rank was around 17, but if he attacked so openly, he wouldn't go above 10. Hearing such words, he even got tears, but it was more because of the pain. Hee-won and Se-hyun were also looking at everything with horror and worry for their friend. They were wondering what they should do. While they're stuck here, Gamin is already getting farther away, and they don't have much time as it is. Gamin was already looking out the window. He thought that his friends were probably messing around so he wouldn't be too offended by the move. He attacked again, this time with his foot, but Taejo successfully blocked it as well. However, this time something unforeseen happened. The blow almost went away. He didn't stop hitting again and again, not giving his opponent a chance to rest. Li Zhong even started praying. He only asked once, he only needed to hit once, and everything would be fine from there. But while he couldn't do that, Taeho silently blocked his blows, even though it was starting to annoy him. Finally, he didn't stymie and decided to strike back, coming in from the left. But Li Chong didn't even give him that opportunity. He just tripped and fell down himself. This, however, was only worse, for he now saw clearly that such a fellow was no match for him. Han Kyung ran up to him saying he was bleeding, but Li Chong didn't care. She told him to stop fighting because it was dangerous. They should have called the police from the beginning. But Li Chong replied that this way they would only waste time. He would continue to fight, even though he had no idea how he could win. He remembered how Ga-ming had punched that one outside the school. Why was only one punch enough for him then? How strong he was, Gamin, who was always so unflappable. He started laughing, and Han Kyung was surprised by it, for the situation was not good. This really only made things worse. Kang Taeho ordered everyone to listen to his command. He had his guys take the car keys, so they certainly weren't going anywhere.